Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. Asinex, hello goodbye. Dave, hello goodbye, you're doing terrible? Why? So, not to just gloss over that, but to cover what we went over yesterday, we watched two videos. The first by Space Mage Sage about when the Glowmide Queen was allegedly defeated. Then we checked out Arc Tao's You Don't Understand Dark Souls Lore, Humanity, and Hollowing. So, tonight we're going to only look at one video with Honored Madman's Cursed Divinity, Elden Ring Lore, and then after that I'm going to go back into talking about the potential timeline of events if you take things at face value in the mirror board that I was making yesterday, just to see what all will continue to come out of that. So hopefully you guys are strapped in and ready for some of that stuff. So anyway, Aaron Salinas, Jag MG604, welcome in. And Boris, nice to see you again. Just suffering in the DLC, low level run? Okay. Well, if there's any consolation, they did nerf Radon and they buffed some other things. Hello, way. Alright. So, let's go ahead and check out Cursed Divinity, Elden Ring Lore by Honored Madman.
The Erdtree is my people's enemy. By Marika long betrayed, set aflame. Understand, your kind are not forgiven. The Erdtree faithful. Never will I see your kind as worthy.
Video seems kind of quiet today.
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman for yet another installment of Shadow of the Erdtree lore. I'm your host, Honored Madman. I hope everybody's doing well. So today we're going to be once again talking about the Hornsent, and I know, didn't I just cover them a few days back? Well, that was more like a lore journal style video. I was still learning things as I was making it. But unsurprisingly, it turns out that there was a lot I missed and misinterpreted, so this video is going to be full of corrections, and it's going to be more of a definitive history of the Hornsent style video.
Nah, I'm just waiting for another video to come out like a month later for him to revise stuff even in this one.
Because man, what a lore-rich people. So there was a time back during the days of the Spiral Tower, way back before the various crucibles were spurned in favor of the Erdtree, that horns would often sprout, or rather bud, on beings that didn't typically bear horns, be it animals or people. I mean, that's all the Hornsent are really, just people who have horns. And they credit this evolutionary advancement to the crucible, or should I say the crucible.
And then it says, the Erdtree itself traces its origins back to a crucible, specifically the Crucible of Life.
Because there appears to be more than one. But the crucibles are essentially a mystic nature.
So I'm interested in what he considers the multiple crucibles, if he's trying to distinguish that there's multiple ones of them. And then Cohiba, nice to see you again.
Forest that is said to be quite strong in the lands that surrounded this very center of the lands between, which are of course now covered in shadow. And in many ways the Hornsent can be viewed as the people of the crucibles due to their close connection to them. They seemingly viewed themselves as close to the divines due to the many blessings that the crucibles had granted them, the most cherished of which was their horns. So we talked a little bit last time about the strange and foreign customs of the people of the tower or the Hornsent, such as their love of hunting, cooking, and eating the spider scorpions that are also native to these lands. What's interesting about the scorpions is that it was said up until very recently they were much, much smaller, and that these giant ones can be traced all the way back to the Church of the Bud, which really isn't that surprising given Ramina's appearance as a giant scorpion lady. She's actually more like a mashup of a bunch of different insects, but you get what I mean. And aside
yeah, and I think the reason for that is because of the Scarlet Rot taking purchase within Ramana and her bud and kind of being allowed to reflourish in the land of shadow. So it is kind of interesting that it did seem to not be as potent perhaps before the Crusade, and I wonder if there's any ties to Melina and whatnot with that. Which I wonder whether or not the birth of Melina could have coincided with the Rot becoming stronger after the fact. Because we don't actually know when the Crusades took place, other than sometime after Radagon and Renala had married, because Gaius was like the older mentor disciple to Radon, so Radon at the very least was born. And yeah, I guess I never really thought about it that way.
Aside from their scorpion-focused cuisine, there was also another hallmark of the Hornsent culture. They had a generations-old traditional fighting style consisting of 2 curved blades held backhand style. Mastery of this discipline looks quite literally like a storm of swords. Definitely one of my favorite DLC weapons. Now, as for magic, the Hornsent had the incantations of the spiral. And if there's one thing the Hornsent really love, it's their spirals. The spiral in general, as well as their great spiral tower of Elim. They were symbols of great religious importance to the Hornsent, and it's allegedly based on a normalized crucible. Great religious importance to the Hornsent, and it's
Why is this all like red and blue? It looks like there's random ass Christmas lights in Elim.
Allegedly based on a normalized crucible that one day will form a column that reaches to the gods. Most Hornsent spirits you come across are capable of using these incantations, but there were some who became lost in the bitterness of the collective fate of their people, and these individuals abandoned the use of spiral and tower incantations as it brought them nothing but despair and ruin, and instead they
I don't know about this. I always took this as being more a reference to Mesmer soldiers and their kind of Erdtree incantations, as opposed to the spiral-wielding folk of the tower. So this might be a little bit off, but maybe he's right. He might be able to convince me.
turned to thorn sorcery of all things in their despair, something the thorns were synonymous with. So while the Hornsent religion was mainly centered around spirals, spirits, divine beasts, and horned gods, there also appears to...
Yeah, we get impenetrable thorns in the Shadowkeep. I don't remember where we get the other sorcery from, essentially. I guess it's not a sorcery because it's an incantation, isn't it? Anyway.
To have been a faith dedicated to something known as the Bud, as seen here. Now, this bud in question may be the bud at the end of this spiral tree on the Berserk tablet found in Bellarat Tower. There's actually a bunch of these tablets lying everywhere, so it's kind of hard to miss. So while we don't know exactly what the bud is, we do know that the scarlet rot was weaved from the bud by Ramana during the burning of her church. She prayed that these new buds would find purchase elsewhere, and find purchase they did. Not just in anyone, no, a full-blown Empyrean, and in many ways this was Ramana's final revenge against Marika as well.
And this is kind of where I would have a big disagreement to tie Millennia directly to Ramana. Not because I don't necessarily think it's possible, but just because we certainly don't have enough textual evidence to fully support this. And there is also the potentiality that the Crusade had occurred before or even after the Empyreans are born, and I know I'm giving the totality of the timeline between those two statements, but depending on how you think Millennia was born in relation to the Scarlet Rot can have a couple different implications. So let's go with the first and say that Millennia was born before the Crusade. Then wouldn't that be before Ramana had discovered the Scarlet Rot? And then we're told, of course, that Millennia was born afflicted at birth, essentially. So that would not entirely work. And then on the flip side, if the Crusade had happened before Millennia was born, then one of my questions would be, well, then how did Ramana take that essence of Scarlet Rot and do something to kind of make it go back into Millennia? Is this just a Frenzy Flame type situation where her desperation called the Outer God from its slumber and it kind of re-entered the lands between? I don't really know, but I kind of don't think either timeline works for this, unfortunately. And Jagmag agrees. So both are from the Shadowkeep. Was the one in the Church District? You don't have to know the answer to that. I'm just trying to remember. And yeah, Boris says there's also the Rot God underneath the Rot Lake. For what it's worth, I do tend to think of the Outer Gods as kind of being similar to the Eldrazi from Magic the Gathering, which the reference that I always bring up in relation to that is that let's say that you're a fish in a pool of water and a human were to stick their hand in it, and each finger to the fish's perspective might look like an entirely different creature, but it's all part of a larger whole. And so if an Eldrazi or an outer god is the human in this analogy, then I could imagine it existing multiple places in the physical world, as well as not being entirely of the physical world. So if the outer god of rot was sort of sealed in the Lake of Rot, I don't think it was totally sealed there. The ulcerated tree spirit in the drainage place. Okay, thank you. That's what gives us the other thorn one. All right, let's dive back in.
And curiously enough, after Melania had her epic fight with Radon, she left a sort of spiral root tree that some would say reaches into the very heavens itself in the exact place that she bloomed. In this imagery of buds and spiral root trees, it seems to be very evocative of the spiral bud tree on those tablets in Bellarat. So anyway, every Hornsent has horns, hence the name, but the ones born with...
So, I don't know how I feel about that, but I think for the sake of argument, I could kind of buy into it to see where it goes.
After Melania, some would say, reaches into the very heavens itself in the exact place that she bloomed. In this imagery of buds and spiral root trees, it seems to be very evocative of the spiral bud tree on those tablets in Bellarat.
Now I'm kind of wondering whether or not the Halig tree was started as Melania's tree and kind of meant to have been purified by Mikola and or his blood, since we kind of get the spiral tree depiction here. I don't entirely think so, because I don't know how well that would fit in with the not the Blood Virgins, but the base game version of it. I'm drawing a blank of what they're called. Damn it. Anyway, I guess my biggest complaint about the bud imagery would be that it doesn't super line up well with being at the end of the branches, or maybe that's not entirely right. I mean, it's not quite as fanned out symmetrically as this, which, you know, it's an artistic representation of an idea more than a literal tree, but they do look slightly different, and that might be noteworthy.
So anyway, every Hornsent has horns, hence the name, but the ones born with tangled horns were destined for greatness. That is, if they managed to survive their infancy. I mean, that was the catch-22 of the Hornsent. While the tangled horns were said to be a sign of spirituality and divinity, many tanglehorns died shortly after they were born. When this happened...
And I was just thinking about that in relation to the Newman being seldom born. Long-lived but seldom born. Now, obviously, I think that is a bit of a difference between dying early versus being seldom born, but even though I don't think it works out, it just kind of made me think of that.
And it did, unfortunately, rather frequently. These Tanglehorn Baron mementos were made to memorialize them. The Barons have the effect of attracting spirits due to the spiritual nature of the Tanglehorns, and can pretty effectively be used as tools in combat. Now, what of the Tanglehorns who managed to survive their rather troubled infancy? Now, these individuals were expected to become revered spirit ash dispensers, or rather tutelary deities as they're called. In real life, tutelary deities are essentially guardian spirits that protect like a specific place or a person, or sometimes this expands to the protection of a specific lineage or an entire people. So the Tanglehorns were expected to become guardian spirits, effectively like kami in Japanese folklore. And while this was said to be a great honor, it was also extremely difficult, and many of them washed out and became curse blades instead. Now the curse blades, and I don't think that was their given names, were an order of ascetic monk-like guardians of old ruins and quarantined villages.
So as far as the Tangled Horns goes, I'm not sure if the Tangled Horned folk were actually meant to become tutelary deities. Well, maybe I should revise the statement. I'm not sure if they would go on to become tutelary deities, or if they are kind of a more recent phenomenon of the Hornsent in relation to something else. And I'll probably get into that a bit more later, but anyway.
A couple of them can even be found at Bellarat Tower and the Spiral of Anir Lim. At one point, a number of them were rounded up and imprisoned for an unknown reason, but Curseblades are extremely talented dance fighters that wielded a pair of unique bladed cirque weapons, and their dance-like fighting style was said to be self-flagellating in nature, so it seems to have been designed to hurt them, as perhaps some sort of penitence for not becoming true tutelary deities. Or it was developed to honor the lion dance. Either way, though, when the times of war came to the lands that would become known as the Lands of Shadow, this self-flagellating dance got turned on to the invaders as well. And the strict monk-like discipline that these Curseblades achieved while attempting to become deities served them quite well in their new roles. I mean, they went from attempting to become guardian spirits to becoming guardian monks. It's tough to say if this was born from a sense of duty or if it was by choice. In theory, the Curseblades should have no love for the Hornsent, who stuffed them into jails just like anybody else. But on the other hand, the Curseblades appear to be gluttons for punishment, judging by their self-flagellation, so maybe they're just into being treated like shit.
So now that I think about it, the way that Moog and the Omen were kind of assailed by spirits seems to be partly because of their cursed blood and whatnot. So I wonder if them flagellating themselves was another way of trying to beckon spirits to be invoked for divinity, for their spiritual ascension and whatnot, rather than just letting their impurities out of them. And maybe it's a little bit of a dual-pronged approach there. You spent the last hour dying and seldomly killing this failed deity, but you finally got his weapon? Oh, which one are you trying to kill? I thought the Cirque was a guaranteed drop. Are you talking about, like, Labyrinth? But you said you were doing the, No, he drops Mira. Anyway.
It's probably just some monk thing that I wouldn't understand. These guys abstain from their indulgences, and I submerge myself within mine. Either way, though, the fact remains that these guys are 100% built for defending and protecting the dilapidated, rundown ruins of a fallen civilization, and they look the part too, which really is the most important thing. Anyway, though, that wasn't the only alternative if you managed to wash out of becoming a tutelary deity. The other alternative for a prospective Tanglehorn was the path of the Inquisitor. They appear to be a religious order as they wield these golden barbs and act as confessors for the Hornsent religion. Coercive questioning being their specialty, which is really just another fancy word for torture, so they were essentially torturers. Which again is hilarious because they also serve as priests. Very fitting. They sometimes refer to themselves as sorcerers, and their magic is referred to as a sorcery, even though the magic itself is simply wielded as an incantation of the tower, so it's basically a sorcery used as an incantation for some bizarre reason. Anyway, the Inquisitors come in a couple different flavors. There's the Elder Inquisitor, who I believe is only found in the form of Jory, and then there's two others, regular or Discord mod. Oh, I almost forgot, there's also these antler-headed sons of bitches in Anir Elim who spam cast the spiral incantation on you as soon as you step into their range.
Yeah, those dudes or gals, whatever they are relentless. Yeah, I guess I would need to compare Yori's model to other Inquisitors. I don't remember if it's unique, to be honest.
And they seem to be senior Inquisitors, probably lower ranked than Jory, but maybe higher ranked than the average ones we see, and possibly the fat ones as well. Although the fat ones do have the whole inhuman physiology thing going on, so they might actually be quite high ranked as well. So these guys served as priests and religious fixtures at the Great Spiral Tower of Anir Elim alongside the Masters of the Storm themselves, the Divine Beast Warriors. At one point, a massive army of Inquisitors led by Elder Inquisitor Jory was sent into the Abyssal Woods following Midra's discovery of an orange flame that was capable of burning anything, even spirits. And naturally this scared the ever-loving fucking shit out of the Hornsent, so they in turn sent this ridiculously large force to suppress it, regardless if Midra was a friend of the Horned Folk and even had many Hornsent employed at his castle by that time who were fiercely loyal to him. None of that mattered. The flame needed.
And it might also be noteworthy that this guy kind of says that he is of the same kin as the Hornsent, and because he's part of Midra's retinue, it could suggest that Midra himself was a Hornsent, even though we never actually see him with horns. And that might also tie into the way that there are what I call hornless Hornsent ghosts in not Anir Elim, but Belurot, as well as all throughout the Shadowlands. And then Discerning Tarnish, nice to see you again. Welcome back in.
Needed to be contained. It couldn't be allowed to spread beyond the woods. I imagine they really didn't want it reaching places like the gravesite plain, for example, that's filled with those spirit graves. Now, this inquisition into the abyssal woods seems to have succeeded in keeping it contained, which itself was mainly due to Midra's own enduring of the intense torture he suffered at the hands of these inquisitors. But hilariously enough, many of the inquisitors themselves fell to the madness while attempting to harness its power into incantations, with the resulting spell proving to be a meager victory at best over the flame. Now, sidebar, I like how we got this somewhat origin of Frenzied Burst, because I don't believe there's any other characters or NPCs that use it throughout the game, just these Inquisitors. So I'm headcanoning that they invented it while they were on their Inquisition into those abyssal woods. Again, a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. At least it's not just pouring from their eyes like it is every other frenzied enemy. At least there's some degree of control, which itself must be a testament to the Inquisitor's mental fortitude. I mean, you gotta hand it to him. Which I guess is exactly what it would take to carry out this type of work. Well, that or a strong faith, I suppose. Because these Inquisitors tortured and executed a great many of Midra's castle staff. Again, many of whom were Hornsent. You can actually see what appears to be an executioner's row of beheaded corpses with golden glowing bars shoved into their neck holes. But this Inquisition was a spiritual undertaking, religious if you will, due to the threat it posed to the spirits who were very important to the Hornsent, and naturally following this, the land was declared forbidden to them for fear of them contracting the madness. It was said that the wise know to stay away, and this apparently extends even to Torrent, who again is basically a Hornsent horse, and he is described as old, which I think also implies wise. This could be the explanation behind why he sort of just fucks off for the entire section of the Abyssal Woods. I suppose it would make sense to me. At least there's a lore reason behind it. I mean, Torrent is a spirit steed. He doesn't want to get melted away. Now, moving on to the military...
Which is kind of ironic that he doesn't give a damn about the Eye of Sauron or anything else in the base game relating to Frenzied Flame, but, that would have been a cool way to add some more attention to some places in the overworld. And then, having said that, I also think it would have been really annoying having to go back through those areas in subsequent playthroughs. So it's like, no matter what they do, we'll always complain.
Might of the Hornsent. It was certainly formidable. They were commanded and led by the Horned Warriors, essentially these hulking guardians who had attained their inhuman strength through divine invocation. Now, the Horned Warriors claimed to descend from the first divine bird warrior named Ornis, who supposedly tamed the divine bird and conquered the skies with it until he eventually fell, and when he did eventually fall back to Earth, he lived on as a guardian deity of the temple quarter in Raul, back when it was actually a city, and not an ancient ruin. Although the bird warriors can still be found amongst the ruins to this day, so I guess that's got to count for something. Anyway, these bird warriors, the disciples of Ornis, if you will, were said to have few worshippers due to their foul temperaments, pun intended. They were said to be mercilessly cruel, which again adds up because of their bird association. I tend to think of birds as cruel. And also within the world of Elden Ring, birds...
I don't know why, but I tend to think of birds as cruel. I don't know why, but that caught me off guard.
Birds have a big association with death, as well as the storm, which I think they're leaning more towards here. And these guys' asshole temperaments is matched only by their fighting styles, which are extremely brutal, swift, and quick. They obviously possess a wide variety of bird-oriented attacks and are capable of manifesting crucible wings on a whim. Their leg armor is also equipped with talons that they can use to actually pick the player up and bring them into the sky to just chuck them back down. It's a pretty cool move.
Yeah, I would take issue with saying that they're crucible wings because they are kind of stated to be different, even though they are certainly very similar in the way that they're presented. But nonetheless, these things are kind of like the equivalent of Crucible Knights in the DLC, where they're more akin to mini-bosses than they are regular enemies.
But these bird warriors are very few in number and presumably are quite ancient, even more so than a lot of the other stuff in this DLC, judging by their lore. And again, while they were viewed as cruel, they were nonetheless still deified and were honored as great warriors and defenders of the Hornsent and the Crucible. specifically the Temple Quarter in the Rao region. And of course, they are still regarded as the ancestors of the Horned Warriors, the military might of the Hornsent. Now, the Horned Warriors were all...
And that's always been really interesting to me, especially considering how the horns on the bird warriors' helmets seem to be made more out of like metal than anything organic to the warriors themselves. But does that mean that they like lacked horns, or they just used the power of horns? Were their horns very small like the Hornsent NPCs? Or, I mean, there is a little bit of ambiguity as to whether or not even the Hornsent NPC had horns, because the horns remain on the headgear even as you wear them. So, just kind of funny. But nonetheless, that does make me wonder if the horns are a bit of a more recent development for the Hornsent in general. But I don't know. And then Ulfer, welcome back in. You think it might just be for worship?
Also extremely deadly fighters in their own right, and while they practice a similar style of swordplay, these fellows also incorporate the divine act of horn calling into their combat style. And from what I can tell, horn calling is pretty self-explanatory. It looks like this. Another thing about these guys is they really don't know the word stagger. Sure, they could be stunned after like a chain of heavy attacks, they'll take a knee, but they'll never stagger, at least for me. The first place you'll likely encounter these guys is at the settlement of Bellarat Tower, where it's said that these warriors and their weapons are both considered spiritual vessels. A number of others is stationed across the ancient ruins of Rao, as well as its temple quarter. Bird warriors can also be found in these parts, as I already mentioned, serving alongside the horned warriors. There's also two ghostly spirit horned warriors that are occupying Midra's manse along with that large force of inquisitors. They're of course there to either root out Midra or at the very least just contain his spread after he made contact with the Flame of Frenzy. You guys know, we went over this. But these horned warriors live in a state in between the physical world and the spiritual one, in a manner similar to the Belfry or Mausoleum Guardians, except they didn't even have to cut their heads off to achieve this state.
Right, yeah. So I've mentioned this before on the streams, but the way that they're called spiritual vessels is got a bit of cultural context associated with it, which doesn't cross over very well, where the Japanese term is yorishiro. And in a certain sense, vessel is a good word to describe it, but yorishiro can also have the implication that it's kind of actively drawing the spirits to it, which doesn't come across quite as well. So with them being vessels for divine invocation, it's because they are literally drawing the spirits to themselves, like a Ghostbuster trap style, I guess.
Now, the greatest aspiration of the Horned Warrior was to become a divine beast warrior, and if they were particularly lucky, to take part in the lion dance. Now, each divine beast warrior mastered a different aspect of the storm, such as thunder, blizzards, or the very wind itself. These individuals wore horned lion masks that invoked the divine beast itself. These elite guardians serve only at the Spiral Tower of Anir Elim, where only a handful of them can be found. I think only 3 to be exact. And of course, the only thing more sacred than these divine beast warriors was the divine beast itself, as well as its puppeteers, for lack.
I should look back at the smaller lion head to see if they have 2 rows of teeth or anything like that. It looks like maybe.
Full of them can be found. I think only 3 to be exact. And of course, the only thing more sacred than these divine beast warriors was the divine beast itself, as well as its puppeteers, for lack of a better term. These storm aficionados really were no joke, and truly were the greatest warriors of the Hornsent, and only the best of these individuals were selected to become sculpted keepers. And sculpted keepers were the individuals who did the lion dance. They, operated and maintained the puppet. And
one of the more fascinating things to me about the lion dancers and even the sculpted keepers is that while they do have horns on them, they aren't quite comparable in size to something you'd see on the fat inquisitor elders and things like that. So it doesn't seem as though the length of the horn is directly compatible with how powerful they are.
The dancers and the puppet as well were deeply ingrained into Hornsent culture. It's a symbol of the very people themselves in many ways. And before Marika's betrayal, the lion dance was said to be a thing of beauty and grace, but after Mesmer's crusades began, it took on a new, more combat-oriented focus. And by the time we get to the Shadow Realm, there's seemingly only 2 of these puppets left. One that obviously guards Bellarat Tower and serves as the first main boss of the DLC, and the other is doing a silent dance in an old temple at the ancient ruins of Rau, which is...
It's interesting that he called them puppets, because I don't necessarily think that's wrong, but then that makes me think of how Ronnie's inhabiting a puppet, and even how we have marionettes, so to speak, in and around like Liurnia, Raya Lucaria, and Manus Meter. So I wonder if there's something more to that idea in general.
Itself was a place where the primordial crucible's presences could still be felt, at least somewhat strongly, safely out of sight and out of mind, and far enough away from the flames of Mesmer's army. So when Mesmer eventually hunted, gored, and impaled the great divine beasts, it was said to essentially be a giant funeral pyre for the Hornsent people as a whole. And perhaps this was the grand betrayal that the Hornsent NPC and the Grandma speak of. Now, some might argue that all this happened because a few Hornsent were kidnapping Newman and putting them into saint jars, but it's not quite that simple. We really don't know who drew first blood. The potentates of Bonny Village who did this to Marika's people were certainly an interesting group of Hornsent. They wielded these massive shimmering butcher knives and whips made of rotten teeth to help carry out their grisly work. And what that work consisted of essentially was carving up human and Newman to stuff into jars that they would stick into their frozen jails to essentially animate.
Sorry about that. Accidentally hit the mouse. What is going on? Oh no, where were we?
Too. This fly sickness was a bizarre...
Hold on, where were we? I don't think we got here.
...oriented focus. And by the time we get to the Shadow Realm, there's seemingly only 2 of these puppets left. Presences could still be felt, at least somewhat strongly. Right. Safely out of sight now.
Hey Tony, hey Pigsy, how's it going? Just occurred to you, why are the jails frozen? Does that do or mean anything? I honestly have no idea why they're frozen. It could be potentially to preserve the body parts as best they can, but yeah, I really don't know.
Out of mind and far enough away from the flames of Mesmer's army. So when Mesmer eventually hunted, gored, and impaled the great divine beasts, it was said to essentially be a giant funeral pyre for the Hornsent people as a whole. And perhaps this was the grand betrayal that the Hornsent NPC and the Grandma speak of. Now, some might argue that all this happened because a few Hornsent were kidnapping Newman and putting them into saint jars, but it's not quite that simple. We really don't know who drew first blood. The potentates of Bonny Village who did this to Marika's people were certainly an interesting group of Hornsent. They wielded these massive shimmering butcher knives and whips made of rotten teeth to help carry out their grisly work. And what that work consisted of essentially was carving up human and Newman to stuff into jars that they would stick into their frozen jails to essentially animate them into saint jars, I suppose. Outside of a loincloth, the only clothing these fellows wear are these bizarre masks of hardened caterpillars to ward off the thoughts of impurity, self-doubt, and other things one was vulnerable to while absorbed in their divine ritual. And this divine ritual in question I can only assume is the art of living jar crafting. I mean, what else could it be? Now, I believe the Hornsent's making of these saint jars from Newman women was in response to Marika's betrayal and not the cause of it, but it really could go either way, and
Damn it, I was muted. Thank you. So, Cohiba said, did Bonny Village folk take shamans in one go, or is this something that happened over a long time? To you, it looks like the Shaman village is too small for this to have happened over a long time. So, we don't really know. The fact that we have the note there in the Shadowkeep seems like it should have happened a long time ago because Mesmer's forces kind of control access to that region. So it could have been something that they did for religious practices over time, perhaps taking one or two or a handful of maidens or Miko at a time. We don't know those details, unfortunately. Now, what was I saying right before I so rudely muted myself? All right. So I was saying it's really interesting that Honored Madman thinks it's the opposite way around because we have so many people who believe that Marika having her people be jarred would be rationale enough for her grand betrayal of the Hornsent. So it's kind of interesting hearing a bit of a different take on that. So, of course, I lost some things in the details there when I was muted. But Global Sequence and Save Frog and Aaron, welcome back to the stream.
It doesn't really matter because Marika went scorched earth on the Hornsent people regardless, although it still would be nice to know those details. So Marika went scorched earth, quite literally, and then cast a giant shadow that obscured these lands from the history of the lands between, and left her cursed son behind in this shadow realm to ensure that the Hornsent were burned for all eternity. Pretty messed up stuff. So as it turns out, being close to divinity didn't save the Hornsent from Mesmer's flames, and neither did it save them from this strange affliction that they were susceptible to. This fly sickness was a bizarre disease that plagued only the Hornsent. It literally turned them into flies through an extremely painful metamorphosis, and reportedly this hurt from head to toe, but it's said that they were relieved from the suffering and pain the exact moment the transformation was complete. They were then corralled to these secluded, quarantined areas like the Village of Flies and left under the care of revered spirits and cursed blade guardians. We can see the extent of this sickness at the abandoned ailing village early on in the DLC. Oftentimes the disease would ask to be put out of their misery, and their caretakers were obligated to end their compatriots' suffering with a ritual bone knife. And curiously enough, those who took care of the afflicted and saw to it that they got proper burials never contracted the horrifying disease themselves. I mean, they continue to live on even today like many Hornsent do as revered spirits, shadow ghosts. It's still currently unknown what exactly caused this plague.
And it is also interesting that the little spiritual dudes that accompany the fly folk seem to lack horns of their own, and I wonder if that's part of it. Because it is also interesting to me that the fly scent, as I call them, lack the horns of the Hornsent.
But my guess is that it has something to do with stagnation, as this land has clearly been affected by America's meddling with death itself, capital D. It's actually stated at the suppressing pillar that all manner of death winds up here in the Shadow Realm, only to be suppressed, and this fly sickness could be a side effect of that. It's also very reminiscent of the Locust Preachers in Dark Souls 3's DLC The Ringed City, where they filled a somewhat similar role. Now, ultimately, it isn't quite clear how exactly Marika betrayed the Hornsent. So yeah, ultimately, it isn't really clear how exactly Marika betrayed the Hornsent as a whole, but it can be surmised that she killed their god or gods. It could also, however, simply be referring to how Marika unleashed her mad dog son on them, as Mesmer just couldn't stop killing the divine beasts, which were said to be the closest things to the Hornsent's gods. And then we have this massive specimen in the aptly named specimen storeroom that is either their god or a very massive tutelary deity sort of hanging from the rafters. There's also plenty of divine beast corpses, some of which resemble ancestor spirits lying around, some also resemble Torrent, but much bigger and more bull-like. Honestly, this is less of a specimen storeroom and more of a trophy hall. And again, this alone could be the very source of the Hornsent's resentment. The divine beast hunt had annihilated their gods, and all that's left of members of their Hornsent divinity appears to be reduced to an old Empyrean grandma hiding out in an old storage closet of Bellarat Tower. She's an eccentric but ultimately very weary old lady who keeps a divine beast head close in reverence. She can't see all that well, and her cooking skills aren't really what they used to be, as the only ingredient she has left is hate. But if you happen to avenge her people, she's able to whip up one last gourmet meal worthy of a sculpted keeper. So whatever Marika did at the Gates of Divinity seemed to be what earned her the Hornsent's ire. I mean, all we see her do, though, is make that braid talisman in the commercial, so it's really tough to say what exactly she did besides, well, I don't know, all of the aforementioned shit, like having her cursed son burn the Hornsent, or obscuring these lands in shadow, cut off from the rest of the world, and turning it into a dumping ground for death. And what's interesting in this world is that death...
So, as far as all of that goes, I like the idea of stagnation kind of being a culprit for the fly scent and whatnot, but I don't know how well that works, because, I mean, stagnation is kind of also part of the lands between. I don't see it being entirely limited to the realm of shadow, but I guess that also doesn't discount the idea either. And then Save Frog said, "Is this the dude who rips his bong at the end of every video?" Yeah, he is.
Death sinks to the very bottom of the Shadow Realm, where it becomes putrescence, not unlike human dregs from Dark Souls 3. And funny enough, one blob of this putrescence managed to imbibe some of St. Trina's nectar, and boom, we got a melting skeleton centaur fucking Kaz on wheels type of boss. But anyway, though, the Hornsent's hatred was such that even armor pieces of religious significance to the spiral or to their people make the blessing of the Erdtree nauseating for the wearer, while also reducing focus and the effectiveness of sacred flasks by about 7% to my knowledge. And this applies to basically all of the Hornsent masks and helmets. The Erdtree's blessing quite literally made them sick, and this absolute pure hatred is perfectly personified by the Hornsent NPC. He literally wants every single Erdtree faithful person dead, and he's not about to stop at Marika's line. I mean, he's like Billy Butcher, you've all gotta go. And him being a potentate of Bonnie Village based on his mask makes a lot of sense given his overall demeanor and hatred for Marika and the Erdtree, which is like the main thing that leads me to believe that the betrayal of Marika had to have predated the making of jars with shaman corpses. But again,
Alright, hold on, let me re-listen to that one.
Marika and the Erdtree.
Let me back that up a little bit further, I guess. And then, hey Nectarine, nice to see you again. Marika's betrayals when she lost the annals of history? Oh no.
Erdtree faithful person dead, and he's not about to stop at Marika's line. I mean, he's like Billy Butcher, you've all gotta go. And him being a potentate of Bonnie Village based on his mask makes a lot of sense given his overall demeanor and hatred for Marika and the Erdtree, which is like the main thing that leads me to believe that the betrayal of Marika had to have predated the making of jars with shaman corpses. But again,
yeah, I don't know how he's reaching that conclusion. Because, okay, I think I'm getting it, that the Hornsent NPC is wearing that stuff, and so this seems like it should be a more recent phenomenon rather than a more ancient place. I guess I could kind of see that to a certain degree, but I'm trying to think if we really have... Well, okay, let's think about it this way. If we believe that the belly rot, jail, and everything was something constructed before Marika's betrayal, then it should suggest that the Hornsent either had jails or they were using their jails specifically for jarring before the crusade had happened. And part of the reason we can say that is because the cursed blades themselves were locked up in there before the crusaders had arrived and done their thing, according to one of the cursed blade things. So I'm trying to think if there's a way to really reconcile the idea that the Living Jar folk things could have been a post-Crusade endeavor, but I tend to not really think that because, like, the emblems on these things are more centralized to the Shadowlands than in, like, the Lands Between, where most of the jars have Erdtree symbols on them. Say Frog said that conclusion is kind of okay, but honestly very cap. All right. And then, hello, goodbye. Really enjoyed the Hornsent NPC. You felt pretty bad that we had to fight at the end. Yeah. I made the winning choice of not making a choice at all, so I had to get invaded by him, essentially. Pixie said, I think he's also saying that Hornsent wants to kill all Erdtree people. He does this by jarring them. His motivation is that the Erdtree people burned his home, and you're not sure you buy it. Okay. Seems like we're kind of in a similar place on that idea.
Again, I could always be wrong. But anyway, the intense divine resentment of America and the tree would manifest itself as the Omen curse, which itself would plague even America's own bloodline. Sort of like a final, eternal fuck.
Alright, damn it. Let me back that up so I can pay closer attention.
Shaman corpses. But again, I could always be wrong. But anyway, the intense divine resentment of America and the tree would manifest itself as the Omen curse, which itself would plague even America's own bloodline. Sort of like a final, eternal fuck you from the Hornsent to the eternal queen.
Alright, so about that, I don't really think that works out. So this is July 6th, so like 2 weeks after the game came out, or the DLC came out. And part of the reason why I don't think the Omen children would have been cursed by the Hornsent cursing America is because the Carians had already been born, which implies that Moog and Morgott should have been born before the Crusade. So America must have been cursed by some other thing to have her children end up the way that they are. Say Frog says, you love that he says that he could always be wrong. I mean, yeah, I respect it. And this is like one of the reasons why I don't get on like Honored Madman for like his choice of language at times. Well, I guess I do sometimes. I point out when I disagree, but generally he is pretty reflective about what he says and whatnot. So, yeah. Right.
Sort of poetic, honestly. She's haunted by the very thing she burned. So to be born with the Omen curse was a gruesome fate in the lands between. First off, you had all
haunted by the very thing she burned. I think that might be an interesting thing to consider, but yeah. Actually, I will be right back. I need to take care of something. The Tomb of the Giants is a pretty scary area, especially on a first playthrough. I'll just go ahead and say it so we get cursed. I do kind of remember the layout of the area, but a lot of the specifics are hard to remember. Byhander, and I think as we start to go down now, we get shot at, or if we're not being shot at right now. Okay. I thought there was a way to fall there. Shows how well I actually remember that layout. Actually, let's try to be smart for once. Wait, I don't think I have any of the prism stones. That's all of my stones are in Dark Souls 3. I think it's a little bit further to the left. Spamming the R2. We said we're going to go about this normal style. It's actually going this way. And then we slide down here and make a right. Oh, it's this one, isn't it? That we just dropped down. Okay, so I was misremembering where. So now we should be like right by the bonfire. It's like down there, yeah. See, I do kind of remember where I'm going, I just don't remember the specifics. I almost stepped off the cliff right then. Okay.
If I do go hollow, then finish me off. I beg of you.
But at the very least, with Miyazaki's interviews, I mean, I guess it doesn't, like, dispute the idea that dragons are abyssal. But he says, like, where'd she go? She really just killed herself. Bruh. Oh, Schnikes, the third one scared the crap out of me. I got by the HUD. Alright, so now we're out of here. Now we just have to deal with all the bone wheels, which have killed me a lot. So out of the frying pan into the fire, essentially. Can we do it? Can we do it? Can we do it? Damn it! Damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it. The goal was in sight. She's pretty OP. Yeah. Especially since melee is really garbage against the Moonlight Butterfly. And she's a caster. She'll probably do a lot of work. Alrighty, everybody. Sorry about that. I am back. So, Jake Peterson, welcome back in. And then Batpick, nice to see you. Got a Spaghetti, nice to see you again. Aren't there Hornsent that hated the jars? I actually don't recall any if there are. Schnikes. You'd love to see some Dark Souls streams after watching the AFK? Alright. Maybe that'll be something to keep in mind for the near future. And that might be a good reason to like look back at some more of the lore, because there is a really big Dark Souls lore video that I want to make. I mean, it's kind of just rehashing a lot of the points that I made in my other videos, but maybe a bit more cogently about, you know, the fire essentially being the curse. So, okay. Anyway, with that being said, let's dive back in. And I'm going to back it up a little bit just so I remember what he was talking about.
Always be wrong. But anyway, the intense divine resentment of Marika and the tree would manifest itself as the Omen curse, which itself would plague even Marika's own bloodline. Sort of like a final, eternal fuck you from the Hornsent to the Eternal Queen. Sort of poetic, honestly. She's haunted by the very thing she burned. So to be born with the Omen curse was a gruesome fate in the lands between. First off, you had all of these painful ass horns growing out of your elbow, your eye, all different parts of your head or body or leg or knee or behind your knee, just in the worst places imaginable. And you were shunned, of course. Usually forced to have your already painful horns painfully removed. Then you were given a weapon that was specifically designed to be taken away from you if you didn't do as told, and were made to fight in a war for the same people that shunned you in the first place for your entire life for something you had absolutely no control over. Curiously enough, the Omens all have white hair, which is not unlike the Lion Guardians, who all...
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, and I think somebody else brought that up in another video, but I kind of forgot, but for some reason it was just standing out to me right now.
Also have a white mane and Omen horns. This is a trait they both have in common with the ancestral followers, themselves a horned race who worship undying horned beasts.
And that I strongly disagree with. I do not believe that the followers are horned at all, and they're just wearing headgear, but I digress.
It's almost like there's no way there's not a connection there. Now, as for the white hair, it could simply show that one is connected to their ancestors in a similar fashion to the horns, and it could also be equally viewed as a sign of spirituality due to its connection to the ancestral followers. I mean, hair color seems to be somewhat important when it comes to Elden Ring. It's always highlighted, like for example Radagon's red hair, or Marika's blonde hair, or Godwin's blonde hair, or most recently, Rellana's most luscious black hair. And I guess Omen lived pretty stressful lives, so that could be why they have the white hair. One thing of note, though, is that the cursed blades of the Hornsent also possess this hair color, so perhaps it is indeed a sign of spirituality, and it came along with the tangled horns back in the day. White hair does indeed seem to coincide with horns, and both of which are featured on ancestral spirits, so I think that these bull people of the underground civilizations could literally be a shared ancestor of both regular humans and the Hornsent.
So about that, I guess I need to compare them to commoners, because maybe commoners' hair is a little bit more gray or more soot colored, but I don't know how fully this works out, unfortunately.
It's at least a possibility. I mean, should they have ancestor right in their name? Anyway, though, so nowadays in the lands of the Erdtree, the actual Hornsent people are effectively known.
So about the ancestor in their name, I don't think it's saying that they are themselves ancestors as much as they are the followers of ancestral spirits, more specifically. Sore, as far as the Japanese is concerned. So, anyway.
Only as the haunting spirits called elders that plague the nightmares of the cursed omens. And these snickering horned faces would actually be used by an elite order of perfumer warriors called the Omen Killers to mindfuck their prey while also wielding these massive clubs adorned with the severed horns of countless omen. And the Omen Killers, to their credit, imbibed potions that rid them of all their emotions to carry out this rather distasteful work they were charged with. Ultimately, though, they probably just did it so they'd feel less bad about it. Which makes sense. I mean, this duty essentially required them to become demons. And curiously enough, this tendency of having horned nightmares may be something that the Omen inherited from the Hornsent, as they too were said to have been haunted by fell imagery, in this case a fell god, the very same image represented by the furnace visage. It's likely intended to be a representation of the fire god of the giants, since the furnaces also include other fire giant imagery like the two faces on each leg. It's just another layer to the torment of the Hornsent and the Omen. But anyway, much like the Hornsent people of antiquity, many Omen perish at birth due to the horns often killing them, and memento Baron dolls are fashioned in secret to memorialize them. Now, to me, it's interesting that this practice survived Marika's purges of all things Hornsent, but it does say in secret, so I guess some things do fall through the cracks. Now, in the sewers under...
Yeah, speaking about that, it is interesting that if the Crusades happened well after the Omen children were born, that Marika still went through the trouble of hiding her cursed-born children and kind of effectively purging them from the lands between before it was veiled in shadow, I guess. So, anyway. Corey, nice to see you again. You agree that the ancestral followers seem to be like the lands between hippies, trying to get back to nature like their noble ancient ancestors practiced. Yeah. And it's kind of weird to me that the ancestral followers don't use metal, but the Hornsent do. So there does seem to be a little bit of a break between those two cultures as well, which is kind of odd, but I don't know.
Under Landell, the curse-born barons are crafted with horns for the royal omens whose names will never be known. These mementos of the fallen omen resonate with spiritual energy and can be used as tools to summon vengeful wraiths, spirits of those who died cursed and were unable to return to the Erdtree. The Tanglehorn Baron of the Hornsent summons slightly brighter wraiths that act as the affinity spell from Dark Souls 3, while the Curseborn ones simply call forth a barrage of golden fiery wraiths that rush to a target. It almost seems as though the horns allowed people to become natural spiritual mediums. The cursed blood of the omens also seems to be connected to the spirits and wraiths that were unable to return to the Erdtree, which I guess isn't really that surprising since the Hornsent as a whole were an innately spiritual people just based off of their rituals and beliefs. The Omen Blood's connection to spirits, though, is such that when uplifted it can turn even artificial life into competent spiritual mediums, as seen with the Big Red Albinorix, who also inherited Mog's black horns after being uplifted by his cursed blood.
I was surprised that we didn't get anything more about like the Gasha Dokuro type Skelebros or anyway.
And this is kind of nuts to me. It's almost like if a robot could conduct a seance and commune with the dead, but it's pretty impressive. And sure, this may be just a testament to the power of the Formless Mother, or any outer god really, increasing the power level of an already powerful cursed blood. It's definitely worth noting here. So anyways though, due to their connection with these wayward spirits and wraiths, some rare omen wind up serving those who live within death due to their own innate connection to the spirits that they possess, and I kind of see it as an example of the omen embracing all of who they are, whether they know it or not. They're kind of like...
All right, so sorry guys, Say Frog was asking what a Gasha Dokuro was, so let's pull up the old Google. This is probably the most famous like depiction of it with this screen. So it's essentially just a giant skeleton, and it's a spirit that takes the form of a giant skeleton made of the skulls of people who died in the battlefield or of starvation/famine. While the corpse becomes a Gasha Dokuro, the spirit becomes a separate yokai known as Hidarugami, and is 10 or more meters tall. Hold on. Yeah, I guess it's not too important. Okay. Otherwise, a Gasha Dokuro will continue hunting its prey until its pent-up anger is released, causing the bones to crumple and the Gasha Dokuro to collapse. So this just kind of ties back into a lot of that curse mythology that I've talked about quite a bit on the channel in Elden Ring, where curses seem to be the pent-up anger, resentment, frustration, negative emotions that things had before they died that linger on in the spirit world. And that's not too different than the idea of like ghosts being stuck in the physical world in the West and whatnot. And then Korn was saying about the ancestral folks that it's also weird they don't grow horns themselves, even though it seems they'd want to, if there are omens running around all over trying to avoid growing horns. I think, and you know, this isn't really substantiated super well with the game, that the ancestral spirits might not have been beckoning souls directly into themselves, whereas the Hornsent were at the very least, and I don't think the Omen had much choice in the matter because of their accursed blood. Now, what I don't know is whether or not the horns themselves are a byproduct of having a high level of spirituality to begin with, and if that ties into the whole methodology of creating spirit calculi, or if it's the other way around, where if you have enough horns or spirit calculi type stuff that things become more suffused to spirituality. I think it's probably a little bit of both in an odd way. And like the more things you consume, the more you consume their spirits, the more spiritual essence you'll gain yourself, which is kind of what happens to the creatures in the realm of shadow and things touched by the crucible, perhaps. But with the ancestral followers kind of accepting life and death into the cycle, I do wonder if they weren't trying to gain horns of their own as much as it was to facilitate the natural cycle of the world, perhaps, in the whole hippie fashion, if I may. Sounds like what Rykard did. A little bit, but yeah, he doesn't have horns. And that's part of why I don't think it's like the best idea to work with, because if we take that at face value, that, oh, like the more spiritual you are, the more horns you'll have, that does not do a very good job of explaining America or anything else quite like that. Okay. And then Renus, welcome back in.
Following Mog's example of individualism and not falling into self-loathing like his twin brother Morgott did. And these Omen then find a new purpose, their own purpose, as priests of death, where they become leaders of flocks filled with other like-minded outcasts that don't hate them for their appearance. I mean, they've mastered their circumstances as opposed to being mastered by them like Morgott was. And they didn't even have to swear any allegiance to a blood god to do it. And yeah, most Omen aren't allowed to find purpose like this, and unfortunately they live out their days as slave soldiers or guarding some unimportant crypt somewhere underground. This treatment was much like what happened to the Lion Guardians, who by all rights should be viewed as godly beasts due to their spot-on resemblance to the divine beasts, but instead are relegated to fighting in pits and serving as guard dogs for dilapidated castles. They're all just unfortunate victims of the Hornsent's retribution against America for trying to erase them from history. I mean, even in the rest of the lands between, where their history has effectively been erased, they, or rather the shadow of them, still manages to hold a considerable amount of influence. I mean, the Tangled Horn appearance became a boogeyman to the Erdtree faithful, and those who had horns were summarily prosecuted in various ways. That's why Omen, Misbegotten, Chain Lions, they're all treated so bad. These cases were viewed as afflictions to be cured, but there was no cure, as it wasn't truly a sickness or an affliction. It just was a normal thing that happened. But these things sort of reminded Marika of her sins and thus made her uncomfortable, so she excluded them from her golden order so that they were naturally spurned by the faithful of the Erdtree, and they lived some pretty pitiful existences because of it. Misbegotten are house elves, the Omen are slave soldiers, and the Lion Guardians probably have it the worst with those painful looking blade upgrades. Then on the flip side, there's the Beastmen of Fair Missoula, servants of the ancient dragons, who seemingly betrayed the Crucibles in favor of the Erdtree and were rewarded with intelligence in the form of opposable thumbs at the cost of their horns.
That's a little bit wild. Let me I wanna catch that again.
Blade upgrades. Then on the flip side, there's the Beastmen of Fair Missoula, servants of the ancient dragons, who seemingly betrayed the Crucibles in favor of the Erdtree and were rewarded with intelligence in the form of opposable thumbs at the cost.
So that is kind of wild to me. I don't think I've heard anybody posit that before, that the Beastmen of Fair Missoula could have betrayed the dragons. I guess in a way that could make a decent amount of sense if you're trying to look for a reason why Malekith is the beast clergyman of Fair Missoula. But man, I just have so many questions about Malekith's arrival and Marika's potential relation to Fair Missoula and everything. So anyway, Pastor of Muppets, welcome into the stream. I like the name. Doesn't he mean persecuted, not prosecuted? Maybe. Sometimes I tend to think he speaks a bit more metaphorically, but he may have just misspoke there. It's a good possibility. Cohiba says, Erdtree and Fair Missoula's age, though? That's part of why it was a little bit surprising to hear it just spoken so quickly off the cuff there. So I don't know that we would say it would be Fair Missoula's age at that point once the Erdtree exists, but it would be an interesting idea indeed that the Beastmen might not have attained intelligence until after the arrival of the Erdtree. Now that I feel like I would really need to think a lot more about. Only a madman would speak like that? True story. Alright.
Cost of their horns. Anyway, the Hornsent worship beasts that resemble the lions, and the Misbegotten look like they've been influenced by every damn near crucible possible. All of these things, like I said earlier, Marika didn't like the way these things made her feel, and she decided she'd rather not have to see them, so these things were the pariahs of her society, and what was divine then was now considered a curse. For what it's worth, prior to Marika's betrayal, the Hornsent themselves didn't seem to have much of a problem with non-horned people. It's just a bit like elves and men in Lord of the Rings. The Hornsent feel like they're closer to divinity than men due to the horns, but they don't appear to have had anything against non-horned humans. I mean, shit, the average Hornsent still refers to themselves as a human, just one with horns. And that's exactly what they are. They're just humans with a slightly deeper connection to the Crucible than the non-horned ones. And you might be thinking,
and that's probably something I should double check. I think I looked into it, but I honestly don't remember the details. And in general, there is a little bit more leeway with the way that Japanese kind of refers to humans and people, and it's kind of the similar way that we just say man in reference to humans and mankind and things similar to men in English, in that let's go ahead and pull up the good old G show for you guys. All right, so these are the characters for human, essentially, with Ningen, but I should probably click it this way. And the first character means person, and this doesn't necessarily mean human. And how do I want to approach this? So he's kind of convoluted talking about stuff like this especially if you guys aren't familiar with Japanese. So damn it, I don't want to explain Kun and own readings. So how do I go about this? Anyway, even though I said it's Ningen, the character can be read as Hito to mean like person when it's on its own. And the Chinese way to read this character, as far as the Japanese language is concerned, and it's not actually Chinese anymore, would be Nin or Jin. And Jin is often used as a suffix to denote a type of people, and they don't necessarily have to be humans. So, for example, in Dragon Ball, the Saiyans, as we say in localized English, are Saiyajin, and so they are peoples from the planet Saya, essentially. And if somebody's referred to as a Hito, that could certainly imply that they're a human, but it doesn't necessarily have to, as much as it means like a person in the sense of an individual. So hopefully that makes sense. Hey, so Philanthropist, nice to see you again. And Stella. And then Origami Phoenix, it's been a minute. Mokujin from Tekken? I don't know what that is. Is that like a wood person? Yeah, I only play... Alright, so the funny thing about Tekken is I only played a demo that came with my PS1 of Tekken 2, I think. So I could only play as one character. It's a dude made out of wood? Okay. Hey, Zafe, nice to see you again. Alright. Let's go into the vidya.
You know, didn't they persecute Marika's people? And I mean, yes, they stuffed Marika's Newmans into the jars because they worked great as divine glue for the Saint Jar initiative that the Hornsent had been cooking up. But I don't think the Hornsent were the ones to subjugate the tribe that became the Blood Fiends, for example. I mean, the use of fire in that description leads me to believe that it had to be a part of Mesmer's crusades. So I think that one's solely on Mesmer. He's the reason a tribe of, I'm assuming, demi-humans turned to the Formless Mother and had themselves uplifted into big ol' ogre-style guys.
And again, he made this video like 2 weeks after the DLC had released, so I don't know like how well spread the idea is now, but I am of the opinion that the Blood Fiends are essentially Hornsent who saw in the shadow of their tutelary deity the Formless Mother, and then it's through their communion with the Formless Mother that they became the Blood Scent, as I tend to call them now.
So yeah, that's like how having horns went from being a divine thing, a sign of spirituality, to a cursed thing, and you're haunted by horned, laughing faces, as well as the ghosts of those who died cursed like you and could not return to the love and grace of the Erdtree. It's like a whole thing. But I believe that was everything I wanted to get to. I just wanted to do like this definitive video about horns and Hornsent. I know I got a lot of stuff misinterpreted in the last video because I was kind of just going all off of memory and half-read descriptions, but I think this one should be pretty solid. I mean, I think it'll stand the test of time since this Shadow of the Erdtree is the final DLC to Elden Ring. Hopefully it does as well as the last one. But yeah, as always, I hope you guys found this video to be entertaining, informative, and at least slightly amusing. And if you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about the various topics I find interesting, then please consider subscribing. We just cracked 27K, which, again, huge deal for a small channel like me. And I can't get into it enough how grateful I am that to have you guys. You know, you guys are awesome. But yeah, enough of that sentimental nonsense. Let's have our outro and then the final thoughts, shall we? I missed.
So loud.
So even after all of that, I'm sure there's shit that I missed and dots that I didn't manage to connect. As always, feel free to let me know in the comments your own theories and opinions, or if I got anything wrong or right. I think the next video is either going to be about
I like this shot that he has right here.
Count Ymir or Midra, one or the other. Then I might do another video about the main remembrance bosses and the NPCs as a whole. Got a lot of stuff planned. And as always, I do have that movie stuff coming up. I'm waiting for House of the Dragon to actually start ramping up before I start covering anything from it. been a pretty slow season. Same with the boys, kind of. I mean, I've liked the whole Fight Club arc and whatnot, but they still haven't redeemed themselves for that Season 3 ending that I thought wasn't very good. But anyway, that's all irrelevant right now anyway. I know I've been saying I'm not going to mention the Aldia video again until it's until it's out. But I just want to let everybody know that it is still coming. I haven't abandoned it or anything like that. I just really want to cover some of this DLC stuff because it's all really hot on my mind. The Aldia stuff isn't going nowhere, and trust me, it is definitely coming very soon. Sooner than it's ever been. I know I've said this before, but he's like...
Sooner than it's ever been. All right, I want to check his channel to see if he released his Aldia thing. Just for poops and giggles. Aldia? Rip the dream.
Like my favorite Dark Souls character, I just want to make sure I get it right. Anyway, though, I'm going to leave you guys with a question. What is your favorite new DLC weapon or incantation or spell? Shit, it can even be like Spirit Ashes or Ash of War. I really like the Poison Flower Blooms Twice. And from what I've told, there's a good amount of things that got nerfed yesterday, but I wouldn't be able to find out because I can't really play the game. My character doesn't load in, and my world only half loads now after that
that
patch.
sucks.
So also, if anybody knows of a fix for that, please let me know in the comments. I would be eternally grateful to you for that because I can't currently play the game. I wanted to get more additional footage for this video, but since yesterday I haven't been able to get it because the game won't render. I mean, I can get in, but I can't see my character. The only thing I can see is my damn incantation catalyst. But yeah, that's enough ranting and raving for now. I will be seeing you guys very soon. As always, I hope you guys have a good one, and I will see you next time. Peace.
Still is asking if the patch broke the game. It doesn't really look like he uses modded tools to get his footage, so I'm not sure. It could have just been an issue downloading the files. He might have needed to verify the integrity of them or just reinstall, but who knows. And then Jake says he has not released the Aldia video. You've been waiting a hot minute, lol. And then Origami Phoenix says it's still sooner than it's ever been. True story, yeah. Can't argue with that.
Peace.
Have you ever felt the curse? With your whole being, the pox upon life itself, feared and despised by all. The reviled blessing. Apparently not.
Alright, yeah, so that was another enjoyable video by Honored Madman. Oh yeah, I've already gone ahead and linked it into the chat for you guys right now if you want to give him some more support. So yeah, he's already gotten 2,000 more subscribers than when the video released, so good on him. And then Globals said that their favorite DLC weapon is the Great Katana and Rolana's cameo. This is before the update, now it's even better. You know, I really liked the Milady, but I didn't give it enough effort to use, partially because it wasn't as effective on horseback as a lot of the colossal weapons, and it was kind of against my build at the time. But obviously with my streamed playthrough, I'm a really big fan of the AMOG, as I call it, the Ancient Meteoric or Greatsword, because that Ash of War is just really fun, and it's a super strong weapon. Hello, goodbye, live Devonia's Hammer. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool DLC weapons and whatnot. Wing Stance is pretty good. I know, what's it called? Blindside is kind of the GOAT of the DLC in terms of weapon effectiveness right now. Pastor likes the Black Steel Great Hammer. Nice. I really like the Great Hammer that you can throw. I always forget what it's actually called, but it's like the Smith. Oh, it's probably just Smith's Script Great Hammer, something like that. Turned out to be a lot more effective than I expected. Because, especially if you're right next to something, you can wind it up and then hit it with the initial wind up as well as the throw animation, which is fun. Blindside got nerfed, thank God. I'm sure it was a menace in PvP, but I know that was the go-to weapon to deal with a lot of Radahn's bullcrap, but now that he's been nerfed, who knows if it's even necessary anymore. Korn likes the Yoda Sword and the Great Sword of Solitude. Man, I really like how varied our answers are as a chat so far. Rhinus says, Savage Lion Claw with cold infused Great Katana. The 3 hits usually inflict cold. I really enjoyed, at least in the base game, using the 2 Scavenger curved swords, which I use for like all my lore videos essentially. One with Frost and the other with Bleed. Because if you have the Frost weapon in the left hand and put the Ice Mist on it, you can proc the Frost right before the Bleed and get more damage. It's pretty sick. Say Frog says, Milady is the goat. Tips Fedora. And then Jake likes the Horned Warrior Greatsword. Alright, so right, now that we've watched that video, let's go ahead and dive back into a bit of the timeline stuff that we were putting together yesterday on stream. Now, for those of you who may not have joined that stream, this isn't really meant to be a super serious thing by any stretch of the imagination. This is on my public Miro board of what bits of the timeline I had put together before the DLC had released. So you can kind of ignore all this stuff up here and even the stuff down here. And we'll just go back to where we were yesterday. So this is a potential timeline of Elden Ring, taking things more at face value. Now, what I mean by that is there's a lot of oddities about the way that the DLC presents the lore that makes it seem as though what we're given at face value isn't exactly what's going on. So the purpose of this is to see what happens when we do take things more at face value. Now, what I mean by that is with the story trailer in America kind of pulling that thread out of a body, it would almost seem as though it should coincide with the very beginning of her reign and everything. And there's a lot of questions as to whether or not that cutscene has to do with removing the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring or the creation of her Elden Ring and all of these kind of things. So many people tend to believe that the Golden Order began at the beginning of her timeline, and if that's the case and that does depict America's ascension to power, then it should stand to reason that that should also be the moment that the Rune of Death is taken away from the Elden Ring. So when you do take things more at face value like that, I'm just curious to see what all fits together well and then what doesn't fit together well, because my interpretation of the timeline is a little bit different than many people's because of my approach being able to compare the English and Japanese text at times. And it doesn't help that some things are more definitive in the Japanese and more ambiguous, which can lead us to having alternate viable takes on the lore that aren't necessarily always accessible in English. Hey Vorb, nice to see you again. And Fluffy Gab, welcome on in. Alright, so going back to what we started, I just began the timeline essentially with Medur's arrival and put the Elden Beast's arrival somewhere after that. There is the potential that this could be the same thing, but if you take it at face value that Medur was the first star, then it could imply that the Elden Ring and the Beast would have arrived on a later star. Now, with that being said, we don't know if this was literally before any other form of life had spawned in the lands between, or if the ancient dynasties were around, or the dragons. So we're just gonna like leave that alone for now. And so if we do take at face value that the Crucible was literally primordial, then Placidus Axe was the Elden Lord, or the first Elden Lord of that kind of Crucible era, then life kind of sprouted after the Elden Ring's arrival, I guess. Then would that imply the Crucible tree that's told to us in Siluria's tree spear was Placidus Axe's tree? Or was Placidus Axe beaten by Baal and then the fire giants knocked the normal dragons off the mountaintops, and then was it the age of the giants that's not really stated? I don't really know. So anyway, if we take at face value that the Crucible was primordial, like the primordial form of life, then the Crucible tree should be Placidus Axe's, I guess. So with the arrival of the Crucible, we do get the Crucible traits that show up on the giants, the Hornsent, the Misbegotten, and random animals. And so all of them should come underneath the Crucible times, essentially. Now, I don't know if Metter was Placidusax's god, and this brings up a bunch of questions because if Metter was Placidusax's god of the Crucible, then was Metter defeated? Did Metter flee Placidusax when Baal attacked? Is that why Placidusax's god was fled? Or was Placidusax's god somebody else, potentially that feminine figure on the Fair Mizulan Elden Ring depiction, relief, whatever, the sculpture there? So I'm not sure what I would take at face value to be Placidusax's god, but if we go back into the idea of Marika and Godfrey attaining power and that coinciding with the creation of the Golden Order, it would mean that the Glomide Queen must have died here, and that calls back into question whether Placidusax's god was the Glomide Queen. And then, of course, since we're talking about the Glomide Queen, and if we take things at face value that Melina kind of gets a purple eye and says that she's going to deliver destined death indiscriminately to people in the lands between, and that she'll chase us in the Flame of Frenzy ending, then is she the Glomide Queen? And if she's the Glomide Queen, what does that mean in relation to Marika and Godfrey attaining power? And then, of course, what does that also mean in relation to Placidusax's god? So I don't know how well any of this squares together if you take Melina being the Glomide Queen at face value, or even the Glomide Queen potentially being Placidusax's god at face value. So let me hydrate, and then I'll read Pixie's statement. Alright, Pixie says, you think because Placidusax is said to be an Elden Lord, his god would be the vessel for the Elden Ring. You don't think Metter was the vessel since she came before the Golden Star. And I think that is a very fair reading to make. Now, as I said before, we don't really know if these happened at different times. There is enough ambiguity to suggest that they could be the same event, but I don't think that's how it's supposed to be read on a surface level. And because of that, I am more inclined to agree with you, even if we take in the little stipulation of trying to take things more at face value. But then, if we can rule out Metter being the first god, and then something else arrived with the Elden Ring and the Beast, does that imply that the Two Fingers had a connection to the dragons and its god? It definitely seems possible if they're tied into the Elden Beast, but I don't know. So Tony agrees. So where were we? Yeah, we're talking about the Glomide Queen and whether or not she was Melina. So if the Golden Order begins with Marika and Godfrey attaining power, then it would imply that the Rune of Death had to have been in the Elden Ring for it to be plucked out by Marika and given to Malekith and whatnot. So that would mean the Glomide Queen either had direct control of the ring or something along those lines, which should, in my opinion, kind of imply then that the Glomide Queen would have been Placidusax's god. So how do you guys feel about that? With the caveat that this isn't going to be like definitive, and this is if you just take things kind of as they are and don't read super deeply into it. Cohiba says, to them, the real challenge here is how the Eternal Cities and Rao... Damn it. You cut me off. Anyway, deleted their own message. Pigsy said, the most likely theory is that the Glomide Queen was the dragon's god. The Gek was chosen by the finger, so there is a connection. And then Save Frog thinks Gek was way after Placidusax. Second most likely is that Marika is the Gek, in your opinion. Right. And I like that idea because I think it ties things together very well. I just don't think it's a very obvious one, unfortunately. Origami Phoenix is all for the dragon-person relationships. And then Cohiba was saying, to them, the real challenge here is how the Eternal Cities and Rao fit in between Fair Missoula and Bellirat slash Landell time periods. And that's a very good point to make as well. No, you're fine. So yeah, about that, going back to the whole idea of taking things more at face value, if we look at that eternal nameless, the nameless Eternal City underneath Landell as having potentially been part of Landell, then it should imply that Landell and the Eternal City were one at one point, and then its lower section fell down but beneath the earth after they pissed off the Greater Will, which I'll probably need to append that into the timeline somewhere, but that could place a potential Nox treason after the age of the Erdtree, if you believe that the Landell city was started by Marika and not Sarash or a prior civilization which could have belonged to the Nox. Because there is always the potentiality that Landell could have existed under the dragon's rule, like, and under Sarash, because we have the lion symbol on the round table hold, and that the Eternals could have been part of that civilization, which, you know, wouldn't be too crazy because Marika was a shaman, and the shaman were under the Hornsent, and there might be a connection between Fair Missoula and the Hornsent with Sarash, but yeah, I don't know. And so Zafe said, do we take into account the story trailer stating that gold was born from the seduction and betrayal? So that's another good point to take into mind. And one of the issues with that is that we do kind of know that gold in a certain form exists within the dragons themselves. So is the gold meant to be like the grace of gold, or is it meant to be something else entirely? The Golden Order? That is a bit more arguable. So in this paradigm, we would be saying that the gold, and I would say like the golden tree, the Erdtree, and the shadow tree would exist at the same time. So yeah, I guess I should start making notes about what that would mean. So yeah, that's a good point to bring up, Zafe. Thank you. Nice sticky note. Oh, let's just do it this way. This makes way more sense. All right. Birth of gold and shadow. I guess I will put this here. Should be good enough, I guess. No, I guess I need to just move all this stuff down. Where's my question mark not there? Oh, maybe I ate it. Okay. So, if the birth of Golden Shadow happened at the same time, then that should mean that Golden Tree and Skidoo Tree born at the same time under the age of the Erdtree. Pixie thinks the Nox and Newman created the Fingerslayer blade from the dragons and used it on Metter. I could buy that. Wayne Kelly, nice to see you again. Are you wrong, or do Hornsent settlements have a similar look to Lower Landell? You don't know if it's just a looks-like situation. So there is a similarity, but there are enough architectural differences to make me think that they are meant to be more distinct. But good question. Zafe wonders about how Mesmer being Melena's older brother fits into things. Yeah, I guess I could start talking about the children and whatnot. So, yeah, okay, let's do that. Godfrey and Golden Lineage become first demigods. according to Godric's rune. So, yeah, let's just pull up the text for that. I'm on the wrong tab. Okay. I'm not going to get super fancy with it just yet to incorporate graphics and whatnot, although maybe I should. Damn it. Oh, I need to stop clicking. Okay, now over here. So this is from Godric's Great Rune. It says, the first demigods were the Elden Lord Godfrey and his offspring, the Golden Lineage. Now, I guess I'll make this a bit of a different color to help try and make it stand out. But I don't want to do a light color. That should be good enough, I guess. And I'll put that right on it. Fluffy thinks that the Godskins and Bonnie Village potentates suggest that the Glowmide Queen was around when Marika was getting jar shoved, or rather a group spawned when Marika promised no more gods. And you're spitballing there. Cohiba said, taken at face value, isn't it reasonable to think that the Finger Slayer blade is made out of the corpse of a god? Or is that too deep? You suppose it's more of a visual clue than hard evidence. No, I think that is a fair thing to believe. And then the question becomes, what god? How many potential candidates do we have? And that's kind of why I potentially put the Nox trees in here with Placidus Axe's Lord. And that could have come from the Nox god. I guess I could, yeah, I could make that a little bit clearer, I guess. Or let's do it this way. Placidus Axe's god becomes the Finger Slayer blade. So then they would have been potentially put underground even before the Crucible era? Or, I mean, before the age of the Erdtree. It's a little bit weird trying to place when the Nox were destroyed just because of how recent it seems in some ways with Estelle versus other stuff like this. Tony thinks it's pretty ancient. And like that ties back into the whole thing that I was talking about with Lane Dell and the Nox. Because Marika does still kind of sort of have connections to the Nox. And so did Marika have these connections even after their grand betrayal? I guess, but it just seems less likely. But, you know, it's kind of what the game is giving us. You think it's in between Rao and Farum? Oh, yeah, so I guess under the Crucible stuff, I should start including things like Rao and whatnot. And then I'll extend this back further just to show that it's like kind of an older thing. And then I guess one could even make the argument that the Rao civilization, if they ascended their own divinity, it should coincide with the arrival of the Elden Ring and the Beast to make their god / lord. And so then that calls into question whether or not the god of the Rao would go on to become Placidus Axe's god, or Placidus Axe became like their god's consort. I haven't really thought about this way. Zay thinks that Malekith was given to Marika before she ascended to godhood. I think, especially if you think about the role of Empyreans, if an Empyrean stops becoming an Empyrean once they become a god, I would agree with you that Marika should have been given Malekith potentially even before she rose to godhood. Pixie thinks the Nox got put underground a very long time ago, but their fall after that was much more recent. They were doing Albinorix and stuff fairly recently. And that's fair too, that Estelle, as a byproduct of their despair, could have been a more recent phenomena. Alright, so Golden Tree and Shadow Tree born at the same time. I feel like this should kind of be bolded almost, but I don't want to have it overpower other things. Let me hydrate real quick. So you think it lends credence to the stuff with the Glowmide Queen happening quite early on in the timeline? Well, it depends on whether or not you believe that the Glowmide Queen is an aspect of Marika, a daughter of Marika, or a number of things. But we don't know when she wanted to seal Destined Death, because there could have been a point where, okay, so if we talk about Ronnie, you might say that her need of Blythe is to find the Finger Slayer blade, but that might not really be meant in the same sense that Marika's sole need of her shadow is to seal away Destined Death. So Malekith could have just been on standby until she gave him like more specific orders, which is a little bit strange, but part of the issue with the Malekith stuff is we don't know whether or not the sealing within Malekith is meant post Night of the Black Knives or before, like the original times, if that makes sense. Would Estelle become a new Elden Beast if he had a Marika-like pairing? I don't think so. And then, nice to see you again, Captini. So, alright. Where were we? The Age of God, not Age of Godfrey, but the Age of the Erdtree, Golden Tree, and Shadow Tree born at the same time. So, I feel like if you say that the Golden Tree and the Shadow Tree were born at the same time, it would imply that the Shadow Realm was veiled at the same time. And so, let's do this, move these on down. I think that is kind of the implication of the trailer, that the Erdtree and Shadow Tree were born at the same time, and so the Shadow Realm should have been veiled at that moment. But I've got a lot of personal reservations about that, because I don't think it works super well, but I guess I'm going to have to kind of like leave them alone, because the whole purpose of this kind of thought experiment is to see what happens when you take stuff like this at face value and then evaluate them a bit later. And then Tony says there's some cool Bronze Age collapse and Atlantis/Numenor connections, potentially to the ancient dynasty and Nox banishment, especially if you consider Belurot a take on Babylon. Because he said, you don't think Malekith was on standby? He defeated the Godskins, or at least the Glowmide Queen. So, right. One of those issues is that if we do take the Godskin stuff at face value, then why the hell don't we have any Godskins in the Shadow Realm? And like I was saying on, I think, last night's stream, we're kind of left with this catch-22 of we don't have Golden Order stuff in the Shadowlands, and we don't have Godskin Glowmide Queen stuff in the Shadowlands, so no matter where you try to fit the Glowmide Queen on the timeline, you can use the absence of the other to kind of make your point. It's kind of funny. Pixie thinks the two trees could have been born at the same time, but overlapping in space, like two aspects of one tree. The veil happened later, which reveals the shadow tree and the pure golden tree. So you would say that the veiling happened later, but then my question would be, when did it happen and how did it happen? And I guess you could think that it would have happened with Mesmer and the Crusade. I guess I don't have that on here. Godfrey banished. So let me put that somewhere. Mesmer's Crusade. I'm going to put a question mark because I don't know if this actually happened at this time or if it happened later on, like near the Night of the Black Knives. If he was given this directive by Marika before she went to shatter the ring, because she's like, F it. But yeah. Drew says, if the Shadowlands were always veiled, Mesmer wouldn't have been reviled by the Erdtree folk for his crusade. No. So no. Okay, so hold on. I'm not going to directly answer your question because my mind's going elsewhere, so I apologize for that, but it'll get back to it in a more indirect way. So part of the reason why I don't think the realm should have been veiled at this time is because it doesn't help explain what's going on with the Carians being here. And I kind of disagree with the notion that Gold and Shadow had to have been born at the beginning of this, which is why I'm trying to at least first lay down the kind of basic tenets of what's going on with this timeline so I could more systematically pull it apart. But that's a really good question or comment. Cohiba could buy Marika sealing away the Shadow Tree first, then adding half the lands between to that void later. Right, so Drew Wang also brings up the great point that there had to have been Erdtree folk to revile Mesmer, so it couldn't have been at the birth of the Erdtree. So I think that's a pretty definitive nail in the coffin here, and that does raise questions about what the hell is going on with the trailer with the birth of Golden Shadow, which I think ultimately ties into my belief that it would have had to have happened. This would have had to have happened over here. Safe says, that's the most annoying part. The lack of Gek or Godskins anywhere in the Land of Shadow. So weird and hard to reconcile. For real, though, man. And so there is the possibility that this place could have been veiled and then Marika let in her forces after the fact. Because we are told in some description that there were, like, the invaders? Hold on. It's a really important description. Spiral Trees Seal says, the majesty of the White Tower stretching to reach the gods even inspired a secret faith in the invaders, the people of the Erdtree. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this because I'm going to need this description later. So if they're invaders, that kind of makes it sound as like they weren't part of this land. So they could have come in later, I guess. Hey, Without Horns, yes, this Miro is actually already public because I'm just modifying the one that I've done for my previous timeline stuff. And like I've been saying, this isn't meant to be a super serious take on the timeline. This is just to highlight why I don't think the story trailer should be taken quite at face value, essentially. And yeah, Pastor says the DLC also has a distinct lack of Radagon. And we've got, well, by that same token, there's a big lack of Godfrey as well, in a certain sense. But I know what you're getting at. And then Driz asks, did the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring weaken the Elden Beast in Marika? That's a really good question, and there is the potential that it did, depending on how you feel about that wound in Marika's abdomen, which is also located on the Elden Beast's belly thing. If you know what I'm talking about, like the glowing gold scar-looking thing. So... Cohiba said, Messmer's army has depictions of the Shadow Tree on their equipment. You'd think such a thing would take time. That's a good point, too. Let me think about that. I'm going to ignore that for now. Anyway. Pixie says, it seems very hard to get into the Land of Shadow. Mikolim, the most fearsome Empyrean, had to do a crazy-ass plan to get there, so you think the Karian stuff was there before it was sealed. And that's what makes the most sense to me. But, yeah. Without Horn says, that's pretty normal. You feel like most FromSoft trailers have to be reinterpreted after you have a broader context. It just really sucks that it says it's the beginning that was the birth of Gold and Shadow, and we're not told what that beginning was. It's possible that it could be talking about the beginning of Mikola, or even just the beginning of the Golden Order, or the beginning of like the first sin, and... With that being said, we are told that the original sin... Oh, hold on. I guess I should... Yeah. Let's just put this here. So, actually, I guess I should ask chat, because I don't really have super strong feelings about taking this at face value. So, this might help direct my thoughts. Chat, we're told that burning the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin, which implies that it's happened before. So when do you think, if the Erdtree was burned, that it had to have happened? Keep in mind, we're also told that the Flame of Ruin, which was said to have been able to burn the Erdtree, was sealed upon the end of the war against the Giants, which is pretty near the beginning of the age. But we also have other potential flames that might be capable of burning the Erdtree, like Messmer's Flame, or whatever's going on with Melina, the potential Frenzied Flame, or even Rykard's rediscovered flame hexes, essentially. Cohiba says, sequence suggestion, Mesmer rallies his forces, they get shunned by Lane Dell. Marika veils the DLC territory, Mesmer takes his time to prepare his army and destroys the Hornsent in a secret war. So, let me try to address that. I think Marika kind of always gave Mesmer her blessing to do what he did. And she was using him as a figurehead so that way people would blame him for the atrocities committed rather than her. And I think even the people of the Erdtree would have disapproved of her actions, which is why the people of the Erdtree shunned everyone who followed Mesmer, which makes it sound as though the Erdtree should have been around for them to shun him. I don't really know why the people of the Erdtree hated Mesmer before the Crusade happened, beyond the snake connection, because we don't really have substantial reasons to tell us why they hated snakes other than Mesmer, essentially, and the kind of irrelevant snake god that we know nothing about. Wayne said, crackpot theory alert, Placidus Sax's Great Tree was what got burned before the Hornsent era. So you think that happened before the Hornsent era? I can see why you would think that. I tend to think that if the Erdtree got burned, it was from a previous tree burning to help kind of spur on the life of a new Erdtree, the one that we know today. Hello, Goodbye said, it was said in the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, so you guess it was sometime during this era. Understandable. So it would definitely be early on. Asenex thinks it was when America became the vessel and servant of the Golden Order to sever the power and connection to the previous master of the tree. So, my question to Asenex then would be, when do you think the Golden Order began? Do you think it began with America's first ascension or with like Radagon's ascension? All right, so let's go back into when do we think the Cardinal Sin happened? Well, it probably didn't happen much later than the War Against the Giants. Do I actually have the War Against the Giants on here? I guess I don't. I guess I could put it like here. War Against the Giants. America Godfrey attained power. Birth of Golden Shadow. Placid Access God fled. Rod removed. There's the Glowmaid Queen Melina. I guess we could play with that idea a bit more here. Crucible tree burned, became Erdtree. America's original sin and first cardinal sin the same. I'm gonna make this, damn it, so bright. That's awful. Okay. Anyway. Maybe the Erdtree people hate snakes because the Glowmaid Queen was snake-related and defeated when Marika became the god. So ritual of snake killing was created as a reminder that the Erdtree beat the snake? Maybe. Asenex still has a few questions on when Radagon was even born. Was he made whole cloth by the Two Fingers? As we know, the Greater Will was AWOL early on. Was he ever a separate being, or a way to collar the newborn goddess as a price of ascension? Good questions. I don't know. Korn asks, could the Abyssal Serpent have been separate from Mesmer, burned the Erdtree, and then Marika sealed it within Mesmer, and then he fled to the Shadow Realm with orders to crusade? That is a possibility. But it's a little bit weird that we're told that the Abyssal Serpent seemed to be gnawing at Mesmer's flame. But we're also told that Mesmer himself is a flame serpent, at least in the Japanese. So there's a lot of oddities with that Abyssal Serpent thing being like Marika's child. That's hard to reconcile, especially with Mesmer's birth order. Because if Mesmer was a demigod and Godfrey and the Golden Lineage were the first demigods, then Mesmer should have been born after them. And he could be a Karian / Radagon child? I don't know. What's the Black Knight Andreas Ashes in the Japanese text saying? Let's go ahead and pull that up. If it is Andreas. I don't remember which one it is. Actually, do I have a note on this? If not, I should add one. Andreas and Hugh. Crucible Knight powers? Oh, it's the Fire Knight armor. Okay, so it's not that one. Okay, found it. So, Ethan LZO, welcome into the stream. And then Hoffman KSP Engineering, welcome in. So, I'll get to you guys in a moment here. Alright, so the final lines say that these were the only ones who truly knew Mesmer, his flames like serpents, the painful fate that accompanied his accursed form. The Japanese is quite different on that part, where it says only they knew Mesmer, and this is kind of like a sentence fragment which builds off of it. So only they knew Mesmer, him being a snake of fire, or a fire snake. And then the what's the word? Agony of being a serpent. So you do mean Andreas? Well, why Andreas? Oh, you're asking about a serpentine nature? It literally means him like being a serpent rather than serpentine. So I remember looking at this. Yeah, the fact that after they understood that he was a serpent rather than like in a biblical sense of like, you know, being snake-like. So it's a little bit more literal thing, I think, right here. Y'all are popping off. Okay. Zay feels like the fact that Melina is burned and bodiless might tie into the first burning of the Erdtree. I tend to think that as well. I'm unsure when that happened. And I also think there's the possibility it could have been burned multiple times, which is lovely. Forb is a little thrown off by how long the Elden Ring and Elden Beast has had an influence in lands between prior to America and the Erdtree. And it doesn't help that we have America and her connection to Fair Missoula with Malekith as well. Ethan says, finding a time span for any single event in Elden Ring seems difficult. Item descriptions speak of momentous events, but these moments in history could have spanned years or even many centuries in some cases. So you're kind of right, but I think one of the things that we can do is put things in order in relation to each other. And when we do stuff like this, at the very least, we can see what fits and what does not. And through this practice, we can kind of refine our approach to get something perhaps a little bit more palatable until it gets thrown out by the next DLC expansion or game to upend what we know, like, you know, Mesmer's existence and everything. The scar on the Elden Beast reminds Hoffman of the scar on Beast Ganon's head in Twilight Princess. One-star rating, welcome back in. Oh, Nightbot and or YouTube completely deletes links, so my condolences. Oh, you're curious about the flight from the Erdtree. So that part, hold on, where was that? Oh, right, we talked about this on the Discord, I think 1 or 2 days ago. So, his flight from the Erdtree. So this is a little bit ambiguous because, all right, it's at the very beginning. The term Owarate now is kind of like they've been chased out of the Erdtree, which is obviously a bit of a metaphorical use, but when you look at this, it does have a bunch of definitions, and it's used in relation to how Placidusax's god was so-called like fled. But not Uisuku. So this will work. So it could mean that they were chased out of the Erdtree, they were pursued away from the Erdtree. They could have this doesn't really work. They weren't really followed because this isn't transitive. It was passive. They were driven out, they were expelled. And hold on, let me read it in English. Wait, where is it? Oh, his flight from the Erdtree. Oh, so it's saying Mesmer was. Let me double check this. Okay, so as far as the English goes, I would say that there's a slight difference where it says rather than after like Mesmer's flight from the Erdtree. Or wait, is this a subject-object agreement error? Anyway, it's not necessarily referring to Mesmer directly in the Japanese. It's talking about Andreas himself, but I don't really think this is that big of a deal because he's part of Mesmer's forces. So anyway, the forces of Mesmer were driven away from the Erdtree, and it really doesn't say much beyond that. You're welcome. Corn, I'm not sure what you're saying. You think based on the amount of Shin Landel? New Landel? Before we burn the Erdtree... Oh, ash is in Landel, I think is what you're saying. Before we burned the Erdtree, it was only burned once before. Not to mention, it's recent enough that the ash wasn't cleaned up. Your fat thumb texting? Get wrecked. So, going back to the whole Melina thing, it is a bit awkward that she may have been burned once before, and so she's a spirit now. And so, if she gets burned again, that's it. Shadows die twice. Oh no, is Melina a shadow? And she doesn't come back to pursue us as the Lord of Frenzied Flame. So that might help suggest that if Melina is tied to the Erdtree, it could have been burned a maximum of one time before, I suppose. And then, of course, the question would be, when did that happen? And how did it happen? It is interesting that we need the Flame of Ruin to do it, but it's not fully effective until we get Destined Death. So, does that imply that it's an either-or type thing, or do you need both together? So, could Destined Death have still existed, but the Erdtree wasn't able to be burned because the Flame of Ruin was sealed away? Or, if Marika had taken out the Rune of Destined Death to begin with, would that have made the Flame of Ruin ineffective against the Erdtree? I guess that's kind of a big piece of evidence to suggest that since the Erdtree doesn't fully burn with the Flame of Ruin right now, that Destined Death must have been in the Elden Ring at the time for the Erdtree to have been burned before. But of course, I guess that could be still arguable if it was done before they defeated the giants. I don't know. All right, so where were we? We were talking about Mesmer. Oh, yeah, I guess I should put this in the thing then. Mesmer is either Godfrey's child or was not the oldest of the demigods. So I know a lot of people don't like to think that Mesmer would be Godfrey's child because they think the red hair implies more of a Radagon relationship, which I totally understand there, but that's just kind of the thing that people would have to reconcile individually on that front. So at the very least, we do know that Mesmer is older than Melina and Radon via Gaius friendship. Okay. So, right. Cohiba said, burning the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin. It makes sense that the first burning would have happened early in the Erdtree's existence. Unless, I mean, there could have been a time where the Erdtree prospered and then they burned it as like a big sin. But I don't want to go too far down that route just right now. So 1-star rating says Mesmer is America only. Radagon is Godfrey's father. I'm going to be honest. I don't really like the way you've been just stating things so bluntly because you're not really backing them up with anything textual. They're just kind of rambling, which I can't take super seriously, unfortunately. So do I need to build on this anymore, or do I just start dismantling what we have so far? Of course, we have the ancient dynasty and whatnot, but I don't really think it's super relevant to anything else, at least as far as this timeline is concerned. So the birth of gold and shadow. I guess I should ask that note, or like make a note asking about if Rao built Gate of Divinity, then did they raise Placidus Sax's god? All right, 1-star. I'm sorry, but this just isn't really constructive to the channel, and this is like the second night in a row where you've just been spouting nonsense. So, anyway, Tony has a bunch you want to say, but it doesn't fit into that at face value theme. That's totally understandable. Yeah, I could buy that. So yeah, I think this is pretty much it, unless I'm missing something else to consider. All right, Ask Next, you have a good night, and thanks for joining as always. I guess I could try to fit in the thing with the ancient dragons, or the war against the dragons, but I'm not sure how relevant that is. Is there other sigil things to consider? I guess we do have the oddities of like America giving the Crusaders grace at times, which would imply that it happened, later. But it also doesn't seem to be grace directly derived from the Erdtree. I don't know, it's weird. Without Horns can't decide if the DLC makes Placidus Axe more or less confusing. So then, I guess going back to the beginning, if the Rao built the Gate of Divinity and they raised Placidus Axe's god, could that god have unironically been the Glowmide Queen? I know it's a bit of a meme to say, is this the Glowmide Queen to any vaguely feminine depiction of a character in the Lands Between, but I do think this does become a more legitimate question when phrased this way, or framed this way, might be a better way to say that. And then, of course, we go back to that cursed question of, if you do believe Placidus Axe's god would have been the Glowmide Queen, then would that god have been Melina? So, I don't think that works just based off of a vibes check, and we might be able to reconcile it with the potential Nox treason getting rid of the Rao civilization's god. That might be worth exploring a bit more. Could the Nox have killed the Rao because they wanted a Lord of Night? Then, if they did, how come they never got a Lord of Night? Because these dudes knocked him back down? And that could have happened well before this. But then where would the Crucible stuff come in? Who would have made the Crucible stuff? It doesn't help that we're told it's primordial. So was there just a power vacuum? And then would Baal have been involved with the Nox treason? Oh, Placidus Axe could have been too active. This is annoying. Baal is the Lord of the Night? Duh. I mean, that is why they have the Batman theme playing during his theme song, isn't it? Vord wishes we knew who that woman was in the Rao ruins. I would almost do my Batman impression of who is she, but I don't want to wake the dogs. Cohiba doesn't think the Nox had any particular tie to the Crucible. They even made Albinorix a non-Crucible life form. No, I don't believe the Nox did have a connection to the Crucible and the Crucible tree. So, my question is, if the Nox were successful, or I mean, I guess they weren't really successful, were they? So maybe their god wasn't fled at that point, or maybe we could say that Placidus Axe's god got injured and fled because it was scared, and then that could have been the connection. Oh no, this might work. That if Placidus Axe's god got scared by the Nox, then it could have like fled to the Hornsent civilization with a near Elim. But no, even this doesn't work super well because the near Elim should have kind of already been under the purview of that god by virtue of it being built by the Rao, I guess. Although I guess it might be a stretch to say for sure that the Rao did it. But I mean, do we think that the Hornsent raised their own god? And it's really weird placing the humanoid, ancient, possibly giant Rao type civilization versus the dragon civilization. Well, we are told that the ice dragons were overthrown by the fire giants, and if the Rao had giants amongst them, that might be okay. And so maybe the Baal stuff happened way, way, way early. But then I guess like the Florisac stuff. No, I guess that's fine because if the Banished Knights were under Siraj and they were doing communion, we can put this stuff way earlier. Let's think about that. How much more ancient is Fair Missoula than the Rao? Maybe Fair Missoula is legitimately more ancient, and that's why their knowledge exceeded human ken for so long. And the Rao and their Blackstone civilization is more recent. I never got that vibe based off of like the archaeological findings in the lands between. And I'd be hard-pressed to say whether or not there's anything definitively more ancient about the Rao civilization and its culture than what we find in Fair Missoula, with the exception of there's no real metallurgy that I know of, or just like the general look of the columns and whatnot. When you eat dragon hearts, you transform into a dragon because they're silver? I 1000% disagree. We're told that the dragon hearts have gold in them via the gravelstone scales within them. Bale's abilities use pure arcane like the Albinorics. Nox kill a god and make a finger slaying blade. Yeah, damn it. I guess it's true that a god... Well, maybe a god doesn't need to die for the finger slaying blade to happen. So, counterpoint, what if you have a challenger to the Elden Beast and they lose? Would the Elden Beast then make that person's corpse into a blade? Or does the Elden Beast only ever do that for gods? There is the potential that the finger-slaying blade was Placidus Axe's god, I guess. But if that's the case, then it would almost imply that the Nox were successful with overthrowing that prior divinity. Without Horns likes to consider the dragon and beastman stuff as supposed to be understood as like prehistory stuff with the Elden Ring, like before we deal with any trees. Before any trees. Well, it certainly doesn't help that we have a depiction of the Elden Ring that looks like it has roots and stuff growing out of it. And that the Crucible is described as a tree if it's supposed to be primordial. I don't think that the Hornsent uses Black Flame in Rao. Because even when you use the, what's called... the Watchful Spirit, it looks black and white. I think it just... they don't have enough colors. Yeah, Drew says, you always feel like there's supposed to be vast implied civilizations and histories that get flattened out when timelines are made. It's merely a cycle. Even so, I think... I don't know. It's just the question of like what exists when in relation to each other. I feel like should be decipherable to some degree, and there might be a flattening out because there could have been, simultaneous evolutions amongst these cultures. To be fair, I mean, as was the case in the real world, but. Could the Rao have given rise to the Nox as, like, astrologers? This is annoying. Oh, yeah, I guess I don't have astrologers on here. Oh, well. The Rao have verdigris, which is a metal. I kind of got the feeling that the verdigris wasn't from the Rao specifically, but you might be right. Said to be the gift of an outer god, possessed of an enormously hefty yet supple strength, thanks to its rusted nature. Not sure what to make of Verdigris. But if it's a gift of an outer god, that could also imply that the Rao didn't make it themselves. This is weird. It would be nice to know which outer god, because we have like magic affiliated with it, which doesn't seem, or like sorcery type magic affiliated with it, which doesn't seem in line with any of the outer gods that we know. Maybe the twin bird? Oh yeah, I guess that could make sense. Anyway. Ethan said, did the Hornsent exist during the Age of the Dragons? You started to think they were cult during the Dragon's rule that took power possibly with America maybe. On that note, Jar Saint theory. Thoughts? So, as far as the Jar Saints are concerned, I think it's a shame that the localization can imply that the Hornsent are raising the Jar folk up to the status of a divinity saint-like thing, because that's kind of not how the Japanese reads in that regard. So I don't know what to make of that at the very least, but I have wondered for a long time whether or not the Hornsent are analogous with the rise of America. But I'm also trying to reconcile a lot of this stuff with the Crucible and the Crucible tree / spiral tree if it did exist. Actually, well, damn it. I was going to say, there might be the possibility that we had a Crucible tree that got supplanted, pun intended, with a spiral tree, but then I don't think that works super well with frickin' Godfrey's stupid-ass Crucible Knights, unless they're trying to harken back to an era even before the spiral tree, which is possible. It's all messed up, man. Yeah, Pigsy says, the issue here is that America is connected to the dragons through Garank, which links the oldest and newest together with nothing in between. Which makes it seem like the Rao should kind of be older still. So yeah, let's back that up. If... Okay, this might help. If we take Placidusax to be an Elden Lord, and he had a god, was his god raised by the Gate of Divinity, or is this just one of those cases where it's a millennia-style god where it doesn't matter? Because it doesn't help that Placidusax is linked to the Elden Ring, and the Elden Ring's form of godhood is different than the millennia type. This is so messy. Tony says they have meteorites, which in real life is the basis of the earliest metallurgy. Oh yeah, if you want to go with the Divine Towers as being Rao in Origins. The Divine Towers, which are potentially part of the Blackstone civilization, which could be Rao. It's so hard to talk about this game. Yeah, it doesn't help that the Divine Towers aren't like Blackstone themselves, and they almost seem different than the Rao stuff. And then, of course, if you want to talk about the Blackstone civilization, we should also talk about how the Forge of the Giants seems to be Blackstone, and then like shoots us into Fair Missoula. So I don't know. It's also simultaneously too short and too long. Have we even touched on the Ul civilization yet? No. That's kind of why I like left them alone, because it doesn't really tie super directly into anything else. At the very least, we could say that the Ul civilization predates some not ancient followers, but the regal ancestral spirits, because their corpses are in the ruins, and you can't exactly. Well, I guess you could potentially unearth a corpse and then like put it in there later, but the ruins need to be there for the corpses to lie there at the least. And I guess I don't know if the corpses would have, like the animals would have died in those ruins, but anyway, kind of getting beyond the point. Cohiba says millennia type. So, right, when you fight Millennia, she becomes the quote-unquote goddess of rot after she blooms potentially for the, second or third time, depending on your headcanon. And she doesn't have the Elden Ring, but she's called a god. The Hornsent have tutelary deities, which are technically gods in their own right. And then we have the god skinning gods and performing god hunts, which is another thing. And then we also have the forges, which had the old gods, which crafted the Amog and whatnot. So yeah, okay. I think we do have a lot of issues with assuming that the Crucible must have been like the origins of all life, because it seems like the people that made the Smith script weapons and found souls within the molten metal and whatnot should potentially predate the Elden Ring's arrival with the beast, but maybe not. I don't know. And then the Rao civilization. So I guess like the issue is, when does Placidusax effectively become an Elden Lord? And that's a bit of a rhetorical question. You guys don't need to feel obligated to answer that. I'm just kind of silently musing this stuff over a bit more. Instead of raising to sainthood, the Japanese just says, like, be a good girl, go in the jar, you recorded life for this reason alone. Captini says, we need a better word for God in the West. At least for you, it always brings Omnimax type God into mind. Is there a better word in Japan to describe these minor type gods? Even semigod seems kind of wrong. Demigod. So if anything, it's even worse in Japanese, because you have kami, which can mean God, divinity, or just spirit, or even just kind of like the essence of a something, essentially. So it's even worse for them somehow, believe it or not. And obviously with like God in the Christ-like Abrahamic sense, they would add sama to it. So like kami-sama would just imply like a Lord God essentially, and kind of gives it a more reverential feel than like your tutelary deity type gods. But that's a good question. All right, so Vorb says Kami-sama versus Kaio-sama as opposed to Dragon Ball Z. So yeah. Valkyrie, welcome in. Worst rate of the internet. I don't know what that means. You take it back? All right. Thank you, I guess. So, this damn thing about Placisax being Elden Lord rears its ugly head in a different direction than I normally complain about. Without Horn says Okami also does that, with O being like, this is a great god, at least when it isn't a wolf. Oh, okay, I see what you mean, like Okami as opposed to like Okami. Yeah. Oh yeah, speaking of like gods in Dragon Ball Z, like you literally have Kami as in like Piccolo's Kami. So, you know, that's kind of the god spirit thing. So Kami is the Kami of the world in a way, but not exactly in the way that most people would expect, I suppose. So anyway, let's just move past the damn Rao Placidusax type stuff, although it's very tantalizing. So the Hornsent revere the Crucible. There should be a Crucible tree according to the Siluria tree spear. We have the war against the giants, and then Marika and Godfrey attain power. So, as we were talking about, I don't think that would mean that the birth of Golden Shadow should have happened at this particular moment, if you interpret the Golden Shadow to be a reference to the Erdtree, the Golden Tree, and Shadow, the Shadow Tree. So, why did that not work? I should start taking like more official notes. Oh, right. So I guess there's a potentiality that the two could be born, but that doesn't necessarily mean the Realm of Shadow is veiled at this time, because the Carians would have needed to come in later. Vorb is trying to beat Radahn with Teolier and Ansbach in New Game Plus 4. I would just say don't summon Teolier. He makes the fight a lot worse. Hoffman asks, is verdigris associated with the color green, and would that help narrow it down? Sort of. So verdigris is the color of like rusted copper. So yes, in like the most basic facts of the term, it is kind of associated with green, but that's because it's contingent on other factors. The only reason why you like Teolier is you can use Scarlet Rot and Poison on him at the same time. It really sucks, but I would recommend crafting pots instead of using Teolier, because his poison's pretty weak. My suggestion would be, if you're using summons, to just scum it with the Mimic tier and put your like a hefty Rot pot and the hefty Fetid pot on the Mimic to throw. You're about to give up? Valkyrie says, it always seems interesting to you that the Glomide Queen and Godwin's timeline seem similarly missing. So I don't know if you're hinting at this, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but are you trying to imply that because Godwin is the Prince of Death, that his mother would be the Glomide Queen as like the Queen of Death? Cohiba says, the Crucible is the primordial form of the Erdtree. What does that mean for the Shadow Tree? It's possible that the Shadow Tree was the burned out Crucible Tree, if we want to say that it's one thing. For the longest of times, and this is going beyond the scope of this goofy timeline, I was of the opinion that the Crucible must have been like the first Erdtree, as in like Godfrey's Erdtree. But a lot of the stuff about the Crucible horns and whatnot growing on giants and the Hornsent potentially predating Marika does make it sound like it should be before Marika's reign. But I just think it brings up a lot of complications that a later Crucible tree resolves. Vorb is about to give up. Oh yeah, with the Radon fight. I thought you were talking about the timeline for a second. Valkyrie thinks Godwin could have inherited the Glowmide Queen's role as a consort, I guess. Oh yeah, you know what? That kind of can make a decent amount of sense if you think about how Radagon might essentially become a Karian prince in a certain way. Of course, the biggest fly in that ointment would be that the Glowmide Queen must have been already defeated before Godwin got stabbed. So maybe he had a girlfriend and she got by his mom way back in the day. Actually, that would be a really funny dynamic, that Marika didn't want her golden child to have a girlfriend because he was the baby boy. And then Hilka, nice to see you again. Valkyrie was thinking more in the way that Godwin is a lord and the Gek is an Empyrean. So it'd be something along the lines of alchemy involved there. So you would obviously put the Glowmide Queen and her defeat later in the timeline then. Alright, so can we reconcile this? Golden Tree and Shadow Tree were born at the same time, but the veiling happened later. Then the question becomes, when did the veiling happen? It would have happened somewhere after this. Oh, that's what I needed to add on. Let's do a strike through. Is there no strike through? I guess there's no strike through text option. Or can I? Let's try this. Give me 1 second. Let's see if this works. I'm a little skeptical, but... Alright, nope. Okay. I know Markdown isn't going to work, but... that doesn't work. All right. Valkyrie isn't convinced that the Empyreans we meet aren't scions in the sense of plants of the Glowmide Queen, but that's really getting tinfoil. Let me think about that. Yeah, I guess my biggest complaint about that idea would be the gap in the timeline between the birth of Ronnie and Mikola and Melania. And Mikola and Melania being twins of Marika. Yeah, because we're told that they're each and all the descendants of Marika. That would have to necessitate that Marika would be the Glowmide Queen, which I think is a strong possibility, don't get me wrong. Or if not Marika, an aspect of Marika would have been the Glowmide Queen. So, what are arguments to say that the Shadow Tree was born before the Shadow Realm was veiled? Is it just that oh yeah, it's because Mesmer's forces have the Skidoo Tree on their armor. So where do I want to put this? Maybe this just here would be fine. So the question is, What does it mean for the minor Erdtree incantation to be only the kindness without order, whereas the Shadow Tree is like the dark thoughts? Did Marika already have a way to segregate the two at the beginning of her era, or is it something that she learned to do more later on? Because I get the vibe that the shadow part kind of happened later, despite us being told that Golden Shadow was born at the same time. Valkyrie says, what gap? Is there any confirmed gap? And are you to think they don't all come from the Amber Egg? So, at the very least, we are told from Ania and the Godric's Great Rune and whatnot that the demigods are the children of Marika in many ways. And so, setting aside like the whole Amber Egg thing, Ronnie being born had to have happened before Mikola and Melania's births because Radagon was the father of all three, and they have different mothers. So, not only that, it happened in different ages. So, the Golden Order fundamentalists were already out in full force with Radagon's time and him, like, passing on incantations with Mikola. So, the Golden Order can't have been created too much after Mikola's birth. So that would necessitate the Glomide Queen having already been defeated. So I do think that does show a bit of a gap in the timelines there between Marika and Radagon being with Renala versus being with themselves and all of that. What if Mesmer is Marika and the Glomide Queen's kid when Marika decided to experiment with some lesbian self-cest before going on to Radagon later? So there is the possibility that Radagon and the Glomide Queen could have shacked up, and that may or may not include Marika. But I guess that also raises the question of how much of Mesmer is a demigod versus is not. I do believe we get the demigod Feld text appear when we defeat Mesmer, which is interesting. But is he a stepchild or is he the real thing? I don't know. And you're welcome, Valkyrie. So let me look at the grace type stuff. It's a small consolation to those forced to wage a war without grace or honor. So this doesn't use grace, unless I'm blind. This doesn't use grace in the sense of the blessing sense. It's just saying glory or honor, I guess. So Marika gave grace to Mesmer, which implies that the Erdtree should have been around, I guess, because the Lowland rune says that grace was brought with the Erdtree. Is the Lowland rune still canon? I don't remember. I need to look into it again. Let's go beyond the dialogue. Iris of Grace, occultation. Golden traces of the grace bestowed upon those who fell in the realm of shadow. But it doesn't necessarily say they received the grace here yet. Hold on. So they also didn't have their grace stripped from them because they have grace. So that implies they were here before Horaloo was fully left, I guess. Unless they were given it later. But I guess they're also not tarnished, so it might not matter. You've definitely got some weird theories you should probably commit to video someday. Understandable. Skidoo tree is the shadow of the Erdtree. No wonder grace shines ever so brilliantly. So even the shadow tree does have its own grace. Got it. The soldiers who joined the crusade were rewarded with grace of plenty. So the shadow tree had to exist before the crusade, which, you know, that isn't a big deal. The question is, when was it veiled and born? Okay, that's fine. I think that's it, isn't it? Okay. The great heroes of the war were richly blessed by the grace of the Erdtree, but were not honored in death. Yeah, it does say that they're honored by the Erdtree. Well, that they received the strong blessing of the Erdtree. Interesting. Not honored in death. So it seems like they didn't have Erdtree burial. Oh yeah, that ties back into a lot of my ideas. Okay, wait. There were once heroes who walked the battlefields abundantly blessed by the Erdtree itself. Oops, I lost it. Did I delete it? Okay. There were once heroes who walked the battlefields abundantly blessed by the Erdtree itself, who upon earning their honor simply died. So yeah, that ties back into what I thought originally, that during the Age of Plenty, perhaps the warriors weren't memorialized by the Erdtree, and so that could also tie into this here. So this would definitely put them in the realm of shadow, potentially before Godfrey got banished, or maybe concurrent with it. Pigsy says, it says the grace was bestowed to those that died, so those that are not alive don't have grace. It could be like the tarnished getting grace upon death. No, so that's kind of a misreading of it, I think. So let's go back to it. And this might be an English to Japanese thing, or, you know, vice versa, actually. Golden remnants of the grace bestowed upon those who fell in the realm of shadow. Okay, I definitely see why you'd come to that conclusion. So the way that I read the Japanese is that these are peoples, well, the grace of peoples is essentially its own kind of standalone clause that is being modified, that these people were those who were felled in the realm of shadow. So in my estimation, they had grace when they were alive, and they died in the realm of shadow, and this is their remnants. No, it says nothing about the purpose of the jar rituals other than the cycle of rebirth being put into human hands. Pigsy says, the sealing tree is next to the Church of the Bud, which was attacked during the Crusade. Ramana turns to rot after the war and becomes a guardian of the tree. The sealing tree is timed to Mesmer? I'm not sure what you're saying. And then Valkyrie was thinking about it, and is it possible that the Age of Plenty was really the Age of Kindness in its own way, like the Shaman Village, until Radagon followed from TSR? The Shadow Realm? You're not convinced the America Mesmer followed... Hold on. Oh, you're not convinced the America that Mesmer followed wasn't Radagon posing as America. There's something weird going on with the belts on the statues between the Lands Between and the Shadow Realm. So, to answer your question, I would agree with you that the Kindness without order would most likely belong to the Erdtree during the Age of Abundance. And it is my opinion that the Shadow Tree is a byproduct of Radagon doing things. And I think the birth of Golden Shadow ties into the rise of the Golden Order, and I think it's all tied into Radagon doing things. Now the question is, where do you fit the Glowmide Queen in relation to that and the Rune of Death? We do potentially have the Melina connection, but I do tend to think a lot of it ties back into America for a variety of reasons. So I don't want to get into that right now because I've done it quite a bit. I've got like a pretty lengthy video on it, but just to like make a pretty flippant statement, somewhat seriously, going back to what I was saying earlier with Godwyn being the Prince of Death, what does that imply about his mother then? The Queen of Death? So hopefully that'll be enough to sink one's teeth into for now. So right, I was looking at the gray stuff. Was there anything else to do? Oh, right here. So this would be Age of Abundance. So let me think about this. I really wish I had a better idea of what that little statue dude in like the coppice stump of a tree is doing in places like the Lanedell Highway to Rea Lucaria, in Lanedell itself, and in the Round Table Hold. Because it'd be nice to say if it was supposed to depict like the Shadow Tree or something. Actually, maybe it does. Stormcaller Church. So annoying. Anyway. You think the Sealing Tree is what seals the land, not the Shadow Tree. So I would be more inclined to agree with you if by burning the Sealing Tree, we were able to interact more with the main world. Although maybe that's supposed to be the connection, like why Radagon comes back. Once the Sealing Tree is gone, Death can access the Shadow Realm again. But Letta makes it sound as though Miquella's plans are proceeding swimmingly, which, you know, is very suspect in and of itself that we've got that information coming from her, of all people. It's such a mess. But at the very least, we still have the Baldachin in the sky of the land being veiled. So I just can't really get on board with that idea. You think the Sealing and the Shadow Tree birth don't have to be at the same time? The Sealing Tree happens with the Sealing, which is a Crusade thing. Well, for me, I think the Shadow Tree makes a lot more sense as being a byproduct of Radagon with like the thorns and stuff. But I guess we also don't know when he was born, and he could have done that way earlier. America could have done it way earlier. But the issue is, if the Shadow Tree exists, it exists in a time in which the lands between are not segregated. And so when does Mesmer and his forces use its iconography as a basis for their armor and their crests and stuff? You had a brain fart? You don't think the sealing tree seals the land? Ignore you? Okay, it's all good. Stella says, you don't know if you'd associate Marika with kindness? At the very least, we are told that the minor Erdtree is the kindness of gold without order, so there is some kindness to her. Alright, so, do you guys think I'm missing anything big here? Are there any, like, theories that you want to talk about? I'll stay online for a bit longer, even though this is kind of normally the end time. This is part of the problem with looking at the lore of the DLC. It just feels very unsatisfactory to just kind of end things at a note of a blah, because there's just, like, nothing there that ever ties in definitively into itself. And it really sucks that even Muriel doesn't give us any information about the Shadow Realm. It's one thing for Gideon to be a know-nothing, but Muriel's letting us down, bro. Cohiba says, are there any clues as to the origin of the sealing tree? It feels like something America should have the power to make. Well, not exactly. There is the fact that the sealing tree looks oddly reminiscent of the Shadow Tree itself, though. That and a nearer limb was already sealed by the time of Mesmer burning the Romanist Church of the Bud. And there was... Oh yeah, that might tie into it. So let's say... Story trailer lacks Shadow Tree Chalice Tower. Shadow Tree newly created. Where do I want to put this? Under the Crusade. Muriel's by a forgetty pool, give him a break? No, never. I'm gonna pull up the story trailer again.
Peggy 16.
All right, let's fast forward a bit past Mia.
Followed was a war unseen.
Hey Mercy, nice to see you. So they already have the Shadow Tree depiction on their stuff here.
One that could never be put to song.
Just looking to the south from the Divine Beastgate place, or Divine Beast Theater. The well thing would be over here somewhere, I guess. It's the ocean. And this is the Prospector's Town, I think. I finally remembered its name.
Without grace or honor.
Without grace or honor.
The tyranny of Messmer's flame.
So where is this angled? Is this outside of the city? Are we looking... Well, if it's angled towards the Erdtree or Shadow Tree, kind of doesn't really matter. So we have a near a limb crumbling up. So is this the Church of the Bud? So we've got cliffs here. This looks like it should be the front gate. But the fact that we can even see the Shadow Tree at all when looking at this angle does not line up with what we get in the final game. And so maybe this was intentionally done to show that the lands have shifted, which is a long time belief that I've had. But nonetheless, the fact that we see the sap dropping down this low, I think should still show us advantage of the tower that was used to collect it. And it is still interesting that it looks like a hand. I was wondering whether or not this kind of reminds me of America's braided veil type thing. And if it was, what does that say about this depiction here?
Everything.
Yeah, so that's pretty much that.
Flesh. His gold. His golden flesh. His blinding strength. Even his fate.
That was definitely in the Putrescence Fissure Cave because Trina's falling for forever. So at least that checks out. So Cohiba says maybe the tower was sealed at the same time Belirat was veiled. I think that is a strong possibility. The trailers leave a lot of story out, but are so good for real. Yeah, I love the beginning of that trailer. So, yeah, that's the story trailer. There really wasn't much story in the other ones. Well, we had, Mesmer cutscenes, not really. So I'm tending to think that the betrayal of Marika and the Hornsent was moving away from the time of Marika and Godfrey and toward the time of Godfrey and Radagon, which could make a lot of sense depending on whether or not the Hornsent still had friendly relationships with Godfrey because of Sarash on his back or something else going on. And then the Shadow Tree and the birth of Gold could have happened with like the Golden Order and the Realm of Shadow, and burning the Erdtree could be that first original cardinal sin, which could have created the Golden Order and would have led into like the birth of Mikola and whatnot that he needed to divest his flesh of, but maybe not so for the Carians. Calix says, why can't the Shadow Tree be the old Erdtree before it became a symbol of faith and its glowing form? So that goes into a different subject with the Crucible. So if the Shadow Tree is the shadow of the Erdtree itself, it kind of implies that it comes from the Erdtree rather than the Crucible Erdtree, if that makes sense. But the reason why I don't think that works out very well is mostly because I see a lot more commonalities between Radagon and the Shadow Tree than the pre-order Shadow Tree. But to be fair, it is possible that this kind of what I would call the Crucible Tree could have been burned to create the Shadow Tree, but we still have that weird ambiguity of what's going on with the Erdtree in relation to it. So if there's two stalks, why is it that the second stalk is wrapping around the Erdtree and seems to lack the sap? Shouldn't it have been the other way around? I don't know. Valkyrie thinks the Shadow Tree is Radagon's tree in general. So, yeah, going back to the whole thing about shadows, we're told that Destined Death was this forbidden shadow that was plucked from the Elden Ring, and that could tie into the Shadow Tree as well. And of course, if we talk about the Glowmite or the Shadow and its relation to Destined Death and the Glowmite Queen, that brings us back to the question of, was the Glowmite Queen Melina, and was that at the very beginning of Marika's reign? I don't really think that works out super well with the demigods. The first of the demigods being Godfrey and the Golden Lineage. Sorry about that. Dog invasion. Wayne Kelly assumes the strangling tree is the veil, and that's kind of the vibe that I get as well. And I've wondered whether or not the Shadow Tree is sealing the Erdtree so that way its sap can't continue to drip, and if that's why the Age of Plenty kind of came to an end, and why its sap is no longer being produced now. So it's like, you can't die if we don't let you bleed out. And this could be a kind of literal sealing tree in a way. You said maybe the second stalk is also a sealing tree? Yeah, that's kind of... Yeah, okay, yeah, you're saying the same thing I am. And... damn it, what was that item that we talked about earlier in the stream? Give me a minute. Anyway, I can't remember what it's called. Brittle. Brittle? Alright. The Shadow Tree is the shadow of the Erdtree, born of dark notions that bear no sense of order, that twist and bend its stock, rendering it brittle. So if the Shadow Tree lacks order, does that not mean that it's not part of the Golden Order? And so that is another big reason for me to believe it came into existence with the Golden Order. Hold on, let me think about this from a different angle. So why would no order come from the Erdtree if the Golden Order was always around at the beginning? I just don't think it makes sense. And it makes more sense to me for the Age of Plenty to have been kind of an age of not rationing the power of the Erdtree, and because of that, it was withering away. And once they're like, oh no, our Erdtree is dying, like we're running low on resources, America's like, hey, we need to study the Golden Order type thing, so that way we can keep this age of life going on forever. So the age of abundance was too abundant, and now they need to go back on a diet. You think it represents both America and Radagon, but out of balance? That's the key. One side is choking out the other. And I can agree with that, and I think that kind of thematic reading goes entirely with the way that America says, thou art yet to become me, thou art not a god, essentially. And Radagon is trying to usurp that position for himself. Effectively, at least. Valkyrie wonders, is being glow-eyed just being impervious to having the iris of grace and occultation or other illusions put on you? And if being tarnished is similar? So, I don't know, because Miquella can still charm the tarnished, essentially, and he's charmed the other folk. I guess I would need to see if... What's her face? Well, it's a boss fight, so it probably won't work. So you might be able to Deathblight Freya and Ansbach outside of their invasions. That might be worth testing. But anyway, I tend to think that even those followers of Miquella are tarnished, but yeah, I don't know. I'm going to move on. Valkyrie reads, being born of notions that bear no sense of order makes a need for order. I kind of agree with that. Pixie says, it does make sense that the age of abundance is before death and death is sealed. Death begets life. When death is ended, the life-giving sap ends. Things stagnate. America tries to hold on to her age forever. And yeah, that's kind of been my reading on it for a very long time. And in many ways, I think America is kind of analogous to other FromSoft tragic figures like Gwyn in Dark Souls. So that's just kind of where my thoughts are for now. So at the very least, we're still running into this issue of the Glow-Eyed Queen, of course, and Metter. But one thing, having done this attempt at a pseudo timeline, that surprised me was the question of the gated divinity and its relation to Rao, and then of course all of that's relationship to Placidusax. And that is something that I would like to think more on, but I don't think we're going to get much out of it, unfortunately. I said more on. Anyway. Valkyrie said, with Ronnie and Miquella saying 1,000-year voyage, you immediately were like, oh, America's overstayed 1,000 years. That's why she's called Eternal. And that could be a good reading of it as well right there. So, okay, guys. I don't think we're going to get too much more out of this endeavor. So, unless there's something crazy that happens in the Discord to like make me want to like reopen this, I think I'm going to close the book on this kind of timeline for now, and I might use it, or the ideas presented with it, in future videos. So thanks for sticking around with that. Tomorrow we're going to be doing something a bit different, because I feel like we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel of the Elden lore to consider. I mean, I don't mean that like disparagingly towards any other content creators or anything like that. I just feel like there really wasn't a ton in the DLC that hasn't been covered so far. So anyway, long story short, tomorrow I'm going to go on a completely different track and play the Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Connect collection for the very first time. I've never played any of the Mega Man Zero games. I'm a really big fan of the Mega Man X series and even the original Mega Man games, but I just, didn't have access to the Zero games back in the day. So we're going to see how that goes. And then I don't think it's going to take too long to go through those games, but at least towards the end of the month, I was thinking about streaming The Legend of Link when that gets released. Echoes of Wisdom, I think it's called. Legend of Zelda. So that's kind of what is on my mind for now as I continue to think about what I'm going to do with this mess of a timeline and whatnot. So, yeah. Thank you all once again for joining me on this, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next stream at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or if not, the next lore one, which I'll make an announcement for. So, till then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.